brutal, unforgiving arena, survival is the only law that matters. Bloodied, exhausted, and barely standing, the young boy looks up as murderous chants echo from the spectators surrounding the Colosseum floor. As blood drips down his bruised face, the bloodthirsty crowd continues to scream for death, driving the combatants to fight without mercy. Driven by instinct, the fierce young girl lunges forward, her gauntleted fist cocked back as she closes the distance in a flash. She relentlessly presses the attack, swinging heavy strikes at the boy who desperately tries to dodge her incoming blows. Sudden explosive force, an arm thrusts straight forward in a decisive strike. The strike lands with crushing momentum directly against the boy's face, blowing him back through the air. Collapses violently onto the hard dirt ground, pinned down as she follows up with a heavy blow that shatters the earth around them. Surrounded by heavy impacts, she continues her brutal assault upon him on the arena floor. Despite her relentless attack, tears stream down her face as she raises her fists, forced to strike while the arena rings with demands for murder. Silently, she stands victorious over his motionless, beaten body, her long hair casting a shadow across the dirt. The announcer declares victory for number 17, prompting cheers as payout odds are calculated for those who bet on her win. Rushing back to the holding area, her combat posture dissolves into deep concerns as she kneels beside number 8, frantically checking if he is all right. Sitting beside him on the stone floor, she offers comfort, though he can only murmur in quiet defeat. Gazes down mournfully, lamenting another loss, while she gently reassures him of his strength. Bandaging his injured leg, she reminds him that as the elder, she cannot afford to lose, determined to protect him at all costs. She offered a warm, reassuring smile to the boy, gently correcting his hesitation by affirming that he was just like a little sister to her, or rather, a little brother. As a guard arrived delivering their meager meal, she noted with quiet affection how quiet the young boy remained. Rations were set down, simple bowls of soup accompanied by hard, dark bread. Looking over the meager food, she expressed her disappointment that the cheese promised for winning the duel was missing, as she had planned to share it with him. Suddenly, an authoritative, booming shout shattered the quiet moment as a beastkin master approached their cell. Towering tiger beastkin cracked his neck, radiating overwhelming hostility and physical dominance. Leaning down menacingly, the master snarled at her, demanding to know how many times he had to remind them that their sole purpose was to entertain the crowd. Furiously accused her of ruining the mood for the high-paying spectators with her uninspired performance. Without warning, he lashed out with a vicious kick aimed straight at the defenseless boy, declaring him equally responsible. Grabbing the boy by the face, the master taunted him, demanding to know if he could behave properly, forcing a meek submission from the child. Praising the boy's compliance, the beastkin pointedly reminded him of the slave collar around his neck, a magical device engineered to sever the wearer's neck instantly should any hostility toward their master be harbored. Contemptuous disdain, the master kicked over their meager food bowls, scattering their meal across the cold floor while hurling insults at their inferior species. Left in the wake of the cruelty, the two children huddled together, sharing a quiet, sorrowful gaze in the dim light. Sudden tension cut through the atmosphere as an unseen force began to swirl dramatically around them. Tiger Beastkin spun around in alarm, sensing a sudden powerful shift in energy emanating from the captive children. Bristled in shock as a frantic subordinate burst into the room, announcing that security forces had launched a raid. Amidst the suddenly erupting chaos, Celeste Universe maintained a serene, razor-sharp gaze. Outside, the compound plunged into complete bedlam as security personnel breached the facility. Wilzeal observed the situation with annoyance, complaining about the strict regulations against using high-damage magic that prevented them from harming protected human subjects. Calling out to Seth, Wilzeal prepared to coordinate their breach into the chaos. Armed forces flooded the corridors, shouting orders to capture all targets and neutralize the Beastkin captors. Tiger Master seized 8, using the child as a human shield while screaming for his henchmen to protect him and ensure no captives escaped. Lethal strikes slashed through the air right over the children's heads as the skirmish intensified. Across the massive arena floor, guards and invaders clashed in a violent wave of combat. Reaching out to the terrified children, the rescuers urged them to stay calm, reassuring them that help had finally arrived. Tiger Master dragged number 8 and number 17 toward a side exit, desperately promising them treats if they helped him escape safely into the open air. While Wilzeal tried to signal Seth through the noise, 17 reached out in desperation toward 8, calling out his name as they were separated in the melee. Spotting the archway exit, the master bolted for freedom, triggering shouts from the rescuers who warned each other not to unleash lethal magic near the fleeing captives. Sudden burst of devastating spellcraft whirled through the corridor, shocking everyone present with its reckless force. He gasped in agony as intense magic surged violently through his frame. Strength failed, and the young boy collapsed heavily onto the cold stone floor, blood dripping from his face as the rescuers looked on in horror. Standing nearby, 17 stared in shock as the Tiger Master cursed the children for causing trouble, panting heavily from the close call. He let out a ragged breath as the realization settled in. She was 8's elder sister, yet her desperate cries tore through the chamber as she watched the boy collapse, bathed in blood. Ignoring the brutal blow dealt by her captor, the young girl lunged across the stone floor toward her brother, driven by sheer desperate instinct. Across the corridor, the noble dragonkin sprinted forward, his eyes wide with urgency as he rushed to intervene before it was too late. Reached out his hand toward the fallen child, memories of ancient lore flickering through his mind as he neared the boy's battered frame. As a dragonkin nearly 3 centuries old, Celeste Universe had lived his long life without ever encountering the destined partner chosen for him by the gods. Every species possesses a soulmate. Countless individuals wander their entire lives without ever meeting their true counterpart. In quiet moments, his companions had spoken of this rare bond. Yet those who had experienced the phenomenon always offered the exact same wisdom. As his gaze locked onto the injured boy looking back up at him, a profound realization struck deep within his soul. The old truth echoed in his mind. A person simply knows the very instant their eyes meet their destined mate. Witnessing the child's life energy fading rapidly, the noble burst into an overwhelming wave of dragon magic, his eyes blazing with protective fury. Massive glowing wings of light erupted from his back, filling the vast arena with radiant, awe-inspiring power as the nearby warriors looked on in shock. The agonized shout, he threw himself over the bleeding boy, cradling the small body against his chest to protect him from further harm. Blood pooled onto the cold stone, but the dragonkin gathered his radiant energy into his hands, pressing close to stem the fatal wounds. Colossal column of restoration magic erupted from his center, shattering the surrounding floor with immense mana. Chanting high-tier healing spells with ferocious urgency, he poured every drop of his power into saving the dying child's life. Desperately poured every ounce of his magic into the restoration spell, shouting repeatedly for the dying child to awaken and cling to life. Shocked by the sudden turn of events, the Tiger Beastkin master staggered back, utterly bewildered by what was unfolding before him. Without a moment's hesitation, a swift and lethal strike was delivered to neutralize the threat. Force of the powerful impact smashed the massive beastkin into the ground, ending his interference once and for all. Panting heavily, Celeste pulled the lifeless child close against his chest, clutching her trembling body in sheer desperation. Stepping forward, Wilziel drew a blade and pinned the fallen contractor, preparing to draw the blood required to break the cruel bond. Knowing that a slave collar could only be unlocked with the contractor's blood, Wilziel swiftly applied the liquid onto the metal mechanism. Noticing the child had stopped breathing, Wilziel offered to take over the restoration spell, but Celeste begged him frantically to let him continue. Joining his power to the effort, Wilziel channeled glowing magical energy into the child's chest while Celeste held her tenderly. Tears streaming down his face, Celeste continued to plead frantically for her to wake up and live. Screamed out in agony, channeling every bit of his spiritual energy into her fading soul. Suddenly, the child coughed up blood and gasped for air, prompting Wilziel to announce with relief that she was breathing once more. Overwhelmed with emotion, Celeste pulled her tight into his arms, letting out a long gasp of profound relief. Barely conscious, the weak child softly murmured a single word, stirring a quiet moment between them. Apologizing to his companion for the ordeal, Celeste requested that Wilziel check the exact designation marked on the collar, gasped with a sudden exclamation, calling out for a moment's pause as he inspected the fallen children. Leaning over the young girl lying on the ground, Wilziel identified her as number 17 after examining her collar. Celeste gently reassured the child in his arms, letting her know that number 17 was alive as well. The young girl fell quiet and succumbed to exhaustion. Wilziel noted that she must have simply passed out from sheer relief. Turning his attention to his companion, Wilziel asked Seth if he had managed to regain his calm. Tears streaming down his face, Celeste offered a simple, quiet affirmation. Wilziel watched him closely, listening as Celeste spoke his name with grave solemnity. Surrounded by a sudden frost-like aura of magic, Celeste declared the profound truth that had just taken root in his soul. The child was his destined mate. Holding the unconscious girl tightly against his chest amid the crystalline magic, he embraced her with awakening from the haze of unconsciousness. Light fills the young boy's vision to reveal a comforting presence watching over him with deep affection. Relieved to see him alive, 17 pulls him into a desperate, emotional embrace, overwhelmed with joy that he survived the brutal ordeal. Tears streaming down her face, she scolds him through her sobs, reminding him how close he came to losing his life. As he listens to her cries, memories of their shared hardships flood back, showing how she had always held back her tears until now. He looks at him gently, explaining that despite everything they endured in the past, seeing him alive right now is all that truly matters. Overcome by the warmth of her unconditional care, 8 chokes back his tears, repeatedly calling out to his elder sister figure. Holding him tightly once more, she reaffirms her protective bond to him, promising to always remain by his sides as his sister. Quiet moment of reunion is suddenly interrupted by a sudden rhythmic knocking sound coming from the room's entrance door. Instinctively on high alert, the young boy leaps out of the bed and plants himself defensively in front of 17. Smooth, dignified voice greets him from the doorway, instantly triggering a sharp flash of memory in his mind. Standing at the threshold is Seth, pushing a tea cart with an ethereal elegance that leaves 8 completely stunned by his pale, striking appearance. Stepping closer into the sunlit room, the noble gentleman approaches with calm, deliberate strides toward the defensive boy. Overwhelmed by the man's imposing presence, 8 loses his balance and stumbles backward onto his hands. Leaning down with genuine concern, Seth gently inquires about the young boy's physical well-being. Knelt down gently in front of the frightened boy, attempting to soothe his visible terror. Offering a soft apology, he acknowledged that his sudden movement had frightened the young child. Maintaining a calm demeanor, he reassured the boy that he posed no threat to him. The child peered up hesitantly, asking in a trembling voice if he was truly safe from harm. With a gentle look, The nobleman confirmed that he would never raise a hand against him. Noticing the cold floor, he asked for permission to lift the child up to the bed. Lifting the frail child easily, he settled him comfortably before presenting a warm spread of food. Children marveled at the lavish meal before them, amazed by warm food and actual utensils they had lacked for so long. As they began to eat, he reached out carefully to tend to the boy's hair while explaining the situation. He introduced himself as Celeste Universe from the 2nd Security Unit of Granzuel, requesting their attention while they ate. Explained that after the illegal gambling den was raided, the two of them were taken into protective custody as victims. Looking at their wide, uncertain eyes, he delivered the definitive declaration that they were finally free. Leaning closer, he firmly promised that no one would ever harm them again. Young boy nodded slowly, taking in the weight of the pledge. Went on to clarify that their protection under the security forces was temporary, and that they would soon be placed in an orphanage located within the human protection zone. Fell silent, gazing thoughtful and resolute at the children seated before him. Turning his attention toward the small boy eating quietly, his gentle gaze prompted the young child to tilt his head in confusion. Her place across the room, 17 boldly declared to everyone present that number 8 was her destined partner. Hearing her outburst, he chuckled softly while the young boy remained thoroughly bewildered by the sudden proclamation. Taking a seat nearby, Seth gently explained that a mate is a fated partner determined by the gods, in essence a lifelong spouse. Young boy slowly repeated the word, asking if that was why he had come to his rescue. The nobleman affirmed it wholeheartedly, admitting it was precisely why he had been so desperate to save him. Elaborated further, sharing that dragonkin treasure their mates above all else, even above their own lives, wishing only to fulfill their partner's every desire. Lowering his gaze, he added that custom dictates mates live under the same roof, meaning he intended to welcome the boy into his own home. Seeing the boy's hesitant steps forward, he reassured him that if the idea was truly repulsive to him, he would never force the arrangement. Leaning in closer, his expressive eyes met the child's gaze with unwavering softness and deep sincerity. Moving right up to his face, the child studied him intently before softly asking if he was doing all right. Touched by the little one's innocent concern, a warm smile swept across his face as he offered his genuine thanks. Standing up, Seth outlined their options, noting that 17 would likely be placed in an orphanage or with foster parents. But if they wished to remain together, 8 could choose to go to the orphanage as well during this protection period. Stepping toward the exit, he kindly advised them to take it easy for the day, promising to return later to clear their dishes. Once the door closed, 17 turned to 8, noting thoughtfully that the nobleman did not seem scary after all, finding comfort in 8's trust in him. Sat quietly as 17 recalled her mother's words from before they were enslaved, that a mate is someone chosen by the gods to bring total happiness upon marriage. Because of this, she urged that he should go live with Mr. Celeste. Refusing to leave her behind, the young boy insisted that she could come along as well, but she reassured him with a bright smile, suddenly declaring that she had a marvelous idea. Meanwhile, out on the balcony, Wilziel rushed over to Seth, breathlessly demanding to know if the rumors were true and if he had really refused to take in 17. In response, Seth calmly clarified that he had not refused but merely put the decision on hold. Outraged, Wilziel grabbed Seth by his collar, shouting about how unfair it was that he was hesitating when finding one's designated mate was normally an occasion for absolute joy. Adjusting his collar after being released, the silver-haired noble explained that because 17 is human, she lacks the natural instinct of dragonfolk to recognize her mate, meaning he cannot force her into anything. Understanding the logic, Wilzel nevertheless looked at his friend with deep concern, questioning if he was truly content with letting her go. Overwhelmed by intense emotion, Wilziel rested his head against the railing, confessing that even the thought of being separated from his own mate made his heart ache unbearably, barely keeping his composure. Teasing him slightly about his intense attachment, Seth reminded him that his mate was still just a child, causing Wilziel to recoil in defensive indignation. Beneath his flustered exterior, Wilziel harbored a deep, fierce desire to remain by her side and protect her above all else. Remembered the gentle feeling of her small, warm hands in his own as he looked out into the distance. Seth acknowledged how impressive it was to give a mate complete freedom of choice, knowing that if she ultimately chose to obey her own wishes, he would have no choice but to accept it. Leaning back casually, Wilziel remarked with a smirk that Seth's devotion made him seem almost like a slave to his destined mate. Accepting the jab with a soft smile, Seth agreed before turning to head back inside to clear away his mate's dishes. As he walked off, Wilziel stood on the balcony gazing up at the sky, quietly pondering the weight of possessing a designate. Inside the bustling room, Celeste carefully patted the young boy's head while his companion watched closely, marveling at the gentle gesture. Sensing a strange quietness, he paused and glanced over in slight confusion as the young child stared back silently. Stepping quietly barefoot across the wooden floorboards, 8 walked away, prompting the young girl to follow closely behind and wonder where he was going. Overhearing conversations outside the room, they listened as voices discussed Celeste and the concept of a mate, leaving the girl to realize the discussion was not about her. Peering excitedly out of the window, the young girl marveled at the crowded street below, pointing out elves, dwarves, and beastmen walking among the townspeople. As they scanned the diverse crowd below, she spotted an intimidating demon-race lizard man, holding tight to 8 as she admitted the creature looked quite frightening. Suddenly, a figure appeared before them in a blur of movement, stepping forward rapidly and startling the children as 8 instinctively shielded her. The handsome newcomer casually reassured the on-guard children, telling them to relax as he had no intention of harming them. Observing him intently, 8 sensed an overwhelming strength concealed beneath his calm demeanor, recognizing that he masked his presence completely. Introducing himself as Wilzeal, a friend of Celeste, he smiled warmly while the atmosphere around them suddenly turned chillingly cold. Looking down at the 2 small children standing before him, Wilzeal candidly admitted that he did not particularly like them. Pressed further, asking them what they truly thought about Celeste after seeing how much burden and suffering he endured. Looking up with quiet earnestness, 8 softly answered that he believed Celeste was a genuinely good person. Wilzeal agreed, praising Dragonkin for their devotion to their mates, noting that being chosen by one was something truly enviable. Tone darkened with suppressed anger as he questioned why 8 hesitated to accept Celeste when so many would cherish being chosen by him. Listened intently as the young boy struggled to articulate his confusion, murmuring words about being taken in and wondering what it truly meant to rely on their protector. In response to his sharp inquiry, the older girl quickly stepped in to clarify that the child simply feared taking advantage of their benefactor's generosity under the guise of being a mate. Realizing the true nature of their hesitation, the man paused, observing the child's solemn face as the misunderstanding became clear. Moments later, he threw back his head and burst into genuine laughter, relieved by the innocence of their concern. Leaning in closer, he warmly advised the young one to lean on their host as much as he desired, reassuring him without hesitation. Continuing his explanation, he revealed that for a Dragonkin, bringing happiness to their chosen mate was the absolute greatest joy, meaning every act of assistance was done with pure willingness. He admitted with a slight smile that he had only acted sternly out of protective affection for his dear friend, wishing nothing but peace for everyone involved. Just then, the noble host re-entered the room, greeted cheerfully by his friend while checking in on the comfortable atmosphere. Apologizing for his brief absence, the nobleman asked if they had grown bored, though the children remained lost in deep thought over what had been said. Reflecting silently on the revelation, the boy remembered the promise that being together brought maximum joy to a Dragonkin. Gathering his courage, he reached out and took hold of the nobleman's coat, gazing up with wide, earnest eyes. Quietly asked if it was truly acceptable for them to remain by his side indefinitely. Surprised yet deeply touched, the Dragonkin offered a luminous smile, expressing his heartfelt gratitude. Encouraged by this warmth, the boy asked if he could receive a proper name, prompting the girl beside him to eagerly request one as well. Nobleman considered the request thoughtfully, admitting with a modest hum that naming wasn't his greatest strength, while his friend watched on with amused satisfaction. Bestowed upon them new identities, christening number 8 as Yui and number 17 as Dissy. 2 children held each other tightly as they embraced their given names. Lighthearted laughter filled the room as everyone repeated the simple, charming names, celebrating the fresh start. Leaning down to their level, he warmly addressed Yui directly. Overwhelmed by gratitude, the young boy nervously clutched at the noble's sleeve and offered a hesitant, heartfelt thank you. Noble's expression softened into a deeply gentle smile upon hearing the child's words. Watching from the side, Wilzeal found it endearingly cute that Celeste had chosen such simple names. Shortly after, an elegant high elf named Valentine Nybarby stepped forward, introducing himself as a fellow guard squad member and offering to act as Dissy's guardian. Dissy introduced herself politely, and Valentine explained that he had requested permission to take her in so that the siblings could remain close while both Dragonkin worked. As Valentine promised to make her comfortable, Yu resolved to do his absolute best in this new life. Wilzeal observed the touching scene with a satisfied smirk. Determined not to be a burden to such kind people, Yui mentally committed to using his benefactor's strength for his own survival as they agreed to work together. The pact was sealed with a firm, solemn hand. As the group prepared to split up, Wilzeal crouched down to adjust the young girl's cape, ensuring she was comfortable. Yui offered a soft word of thanks, touched by his thoughtful gesture, while Celeste and Dissy watched nearby. Turning to Valentine, he arranged to meet at the guard station the following day before Celeste summoned Dissy to depart. Noticing the lingering sadness in her eyes, he gently reassured Yui that although she and Dissy were parting ways for now, they would be reunited very soon. Unable to suppress her tears, she buried her face into Dissy's shoulder, holding on to her sisterly companion one last time before they went their separate ways. Extending a welcoming hand, he gently coaxed Yui forward, inviting her to return home with him. He reached out timidly, resting her small hand securely in his warm grip. Together, they strolled side by side along the sunlit, cobblestone street of the grand city. Passers-by couldn't help but smile at the sweet pair, whispering amusedly among themselves about whether the two were siblings, which caught him off guard. Looking down toward the lower street level, he noted that their carriage was already waiting. Before she could react, he offered a swift courtesy warning that he was about to lift her. A blinding flash of speed, he scooped her up into his arms, leaving her gasping at his incredible swiftness. Holding her securely against his chest, he leaped seamlessly down from the upper walkway directly toward their waiting transport. Once settled comfortably inside, he explained that he rushed so she wouldn't catch cold on the chilled wooden seats, sharing fond memories of childhood while handing her a piece of sliced fruit. Examining the delicately carved apple, she murmured the word palm, a strange sense of familiarity washing over her as he looked on with gentle curiosity. Gazing at the bunny-shaped apple slice, a distant memory stirred deep within her mind, leaving her to ponder who in her forgotten past used to cut apples for her like this. She arrived with her companions before a grand manor house, declared as her new home. Inside, the household staff stepped forward to welcome Lord Celeste, The head servant introduced herself as Celine Audran alongside her daughter Adelaide, offering their formal greetings and promising to take dedicated care of the young girl. Celine bowed. The child felt an unexplainable chill in the woman's aura. Noticing the girl's messy hair, Celine gasped softly and drew closer with gentle concern. She offered to trim and tidy up the child's wild locks right away. Snips of the scissors, Celine carefully styled her hair. Noting how damaged it was, she requested permission from Celeste to purchase scented oil, to which he readily agreed. Celine mentioned she had prepared temporary outfits for the young guest, suggesting they let the child choose designs she liked. The child hesitated, realizing she had no concept of what she actually liked. Celine smiled warmly, reassuring her that from this moment on she could discover whatever brings her joy. The young girl absorbed the comforting words, her eyes widening in quiet wonder. Dressed in a charming new coat, she was praised by Celeste for her cute appearance. Afterward, Celeste instructed the staff to prepare dinner and slice the apples from earlier, prompting Celine to set the servants to their tasks. Soon after, a freshly prepared dish was brought to the dining table. Celeste offered her some fried rice and took a graceful bite of meat himself. Encouraging her to try the dragonkin meat, he watched with satisfaction as she tried a bite and found it delicious. Celeste praised Celine's culinary skills, noting that she had worked for him for 10 years and inherited her mother's talent for cooking. Confirmed softly when she asked if calling him Lord Celeste was acceptable. As they shared their meal, the noble master explained the vast lifespans of the world's races, noting that dragonkin could live between 1,500 and 2,000 years. Continuing the lesson over dinner, he detailed how elves could endure up to 1,500 years, dwarves around 500, and beastkin roughly 250. Setting down his glass, he raised the question of mortal lifespans, prompting her to whisper about humans. She fell silent, her eyes wide with a quiet, lingering sadness. In truth, she was already painfully aware that a human's life rarely exceeded a single century, while he observed her reaction in quiet contemplation. Reflecting on her past as number 8, she remembered how her existence had been engineered to end far sooner than even that modest mark. Her mind drifted to Valentine, who had once spoken of the heartbreak of outliving the mortal souls who cared for him. Memory surfaced of a high elf hallway where Valentine was questioned about his sudden decision to apply as a foster parent. During that past conversation, Valentine had reasoned that spending a century raising a child would cure his boredom, even while acknowledging how fleeting human lives were bound to be. Despite knowing the eventual grief, Valentine had remained resolved to take in a child, earning warm encouragement from those around him. Thoughts of loved ones long past overwhelmed the moment, evoking images of joyous family milestones shadowed by the inevitable sorrow of laying flowers upon a grave. Reaching out with immense tenderness, he gently brushed her cheek, resolving to cherish every single moment of her fleeting 100 years. Light gently spilled into the room as Valentine offered a warm morning greeting to Yui, conjuring a faint, luminous magic to illuminate the shadowy chamber. Focused his magic further, producing a small flame right at his fingertips to light a nearby candle for the young child. Carefully serving the hot meal, he cautioned the young child to be careful while eating, explaining that Dissy would soon arrive and that Yui would spend the day at the second security unit station. Interrupting their quiet breakfast, an abrupt chime echoed, prompting Valentine to note that Celeste had arrived. Loud noise shattered the quiet atmosphere, reverberating sharply off the high ceilings of the dining room. Traumatized by past abuse, suffered a sudden, violent flashback of being struck, dropping the metal spoon onto the table in sheer panic. Young boy clutched his neck, hyperventilating in terror as dark memories of painful discipline surged through his mind. Recognizing the child's panic, the elf quickly knelt beside Yui, offering gentle reassurances that the noise was merely the visitor announcement buzzer. As the terrified child sobbed uncontrollably, Valentine wrapped his arms around Yui, pulling the trembling youth close to his chest. Spoke softly, asking the child to hold on just a little longer while he managed the situation. Yui repeatedly apologized through tears. The maid staff stepped forward, sincerely apologizing and promising that the buzzer's tone would be altered immediately. Holding the child tightly, the gentle elf reassured Yui that no one present would ever harm or strike him again. Cradled in those large protective arms, Yui finally felt a deep sense of warmth and safety that slowly eased the lingering fear. Celeste entered to take her leave. Valentine entrusted the household to her care before preparing to depart. Feeling a tinge of loneliness as the comforting embrace ended, Yui assured Valentine that he was all right to stand on his own. Arriving at the imposing Granzel's second guard station, the young boy was immediately greeted by his cheerful companion. She burst with excitement over his newly trimmed hair, and he warmly returned the compliment, admiring her own lovely hairstyle. As they stepped indoors alongside their noble guardians, Valentine explained that because the orientation period for new recruits was officially over, he would be taking a strict hands-on approach to teaching the children reading and writing. Determined to make their guardians proud, both children enthusiastically raised their hands, promising to give their absolute best effort. Before taking his leave, the tall dragonkin lord paused, giving the young boy's clothing a subtle, caring tug to ensure he was neat and comfortable. Bade them farewell until lunchtime, giving Valentine strict instructions to contact him immediately should anything untoward happen. As the elf led the children down the hallway, he casually mentioned how remarkably rational their dragonkin guardian was, explaining that most of his species were so fiercely possessive of their bonded partners that they would never permit them out of sight. Continuing their tour of the facility, the graceful elf pointed out key areas including the third infirmary, the the cozy lounge, and the extensive library where they would begin their studies. Stepping out into the sprawling courtyard training ground, they observed a towering muscular lizardman instructor shouting stern corrections to knights practicing their combat stances. Approaching the impressive warrior, the elf greeted him warmly, acknowledging his hard work in overseeing the guard recruits. Turning his imposing reptilian gaze toward the group, the tall warrior inquired if the young ones standing before him were indeed the newcomer and his companion. Intimidated by his formidable size and fierce features, the young girl shrank back nervously behind her friend, though the gentle warrior quickly expressed his fondness for children. Introducing himself politely as Charles Lacour, the reptilian warrior extended a friendly welcome, and the young boy introduced himself in turn. Noticing the young girl trembling in apprehension, Charles offered a reassuring word, explaining that he was well accustomed to people being startled by his fierce appearance. Reassured by his polite demeanor, she gathered her courage to greet him properly, sharing her name and mentioning that she was currently staying under Valentine's care. Commending their bravery, Charles inquired if this was their first encounter with the demon race, explaining that just like humanity, the demon lineage encompasses a wide variety of species, including dragonkin, elves, dwarves, and lizardmen like himself. Stooped down as the young boy marveled in awe at his beautiful dark scales, reaching out to touch the warrior's thick reptilian tail. Startled by the innocent gesture, the giant warrior flinched in embarrassment as the older girl immediately pulled the child back, while the lizard man meekly offered an apology, solemnly explained a crucial cultural boundary. Praising a male lizardman's scales was equivalent to proposing marriage, a revelation that left the child utterly bewildered. Continuing his lesson on lizardman customs, he warned that touching a tail was strictly reserved for a spouse, cautioning that doing so would drive Celeste wild with jealousy. Offering a compromise, the giant warrior kindly presented his broad arm instead, inviting the child to touch that instead of his off-limits tail. As the boy patted his arm, he noted the child's striking slit pupils, recognizing them as a trait shared by both lizardmen and dragonkin that granted exceptional night vision. Reflecting on this shared heritage, the young boy expressed deep gratitude for how comfortable Celeste made the estate at night for someone with naturally acute vision. Sincere warmth, the child thanked the warrior and everyone at the estate for their kindness, while the noble elf reminded him that showing gratitude is a fine quality. Reassured by the lizardman's gentle nature, the young girl felt her initial fear melt away, just before her brother eagerly declared his desire to join the guard station's training exercises. Gripping a wooden practice sword, the young girl stepped forward with quiet determination, expressing her strong desire to grow powerful enough to protect those around her instead of being a burden. Watching her resolve, the seasoned warrior offered to oversee her practice himself, reasoning that letting her attempt the training would satisfy her yearning to contribute. Standing alone on the sunlit training grounds with her heavy wooden blade, she braced herself as an unexpected chuckling voice broke the silence. Turning around, she watched in surprise as Wilzeal dropped into a low combat stance, offering to be her sparring opponent while Valentine signaled his approval. Surrounding guards gathered near the courtyard railing, turning their full attention to the upcoming match. The calm, encouraging smile, the handsome swordsman readied his blade against the young girl, fully prepared to test her resolve in combat. The quiet afternoon unfolded. Conversations turned toward Celeste's subtle restiveness after being separated from his companion. Teased gently about whether his anxiousness was merely unnecessary worry, he calmly assured his allies that he could manage his duties, suggesting a brief check on her well-being. Meanwhile, in the training yard, the young warrior launched a blindingly fast assault with dual blades. Watching her rapid movements, Wilzeal quickly gauged her remarkable speed. Analyzing her reckless technique, he noted how heavy those wooden practice swords must be for her small frame. Though her form lacked refinement, the overwhelming flurry of her relentless strikes made her a formidable opponent to handle. Aware of the immense gulf in their strength, she realized he had not yielded a single step nor attempted to counter, easily parrying her frantic dual attacks with just one hand. Desperate not to become a burden that would force Celeste to carry all the weight, she recognized this session was far more than simple practice. Determined to break through his defense, she steeled her resolve, knowing she had to unleash her full, unrestrained power as she charged forward. Leaping high into the air, she aimed a vicious blow straight for his lower legs. He noted the lethal intent behind her dive, marveling that such aggressive tactics were beyond anything taught to raw recruits in the guard. Looking down at her crouched stance as she landed, he grimly acknowledged the unmistakable ruthless instinct of someone raised as a combat slave. Exhausted and gasping for air, she struggled to maintain her footing, frustrated that she hadn't managed to land even a single scratch upon him as doubts began to cloud her mind. Sudden traumatic memories resurfaced in her mind, haunted by the snarls of her former beastkin master bellowing her designated slave number. Ruthless voice echoed in her thoughts, demanding victory at all costs and reminding her that her sole worth lay in killing to skew the betting odds. Overwhelmed by the crushing weight of those dark memories, she trembled in pain, clutching herself as agonizing phantom noise pierced her head. Concerned onlookers noticed her sudden distress, gently suggesting that she looked unwell and ought to retire to her quarters to rest. Peering through the narrow gap of the doorway with wide, frightened eyes, she insisted she was fine, desperately longing to remain by their side even for a fleeting moment. Deep within the silence of her mind, lingering thoughts drifted back toward the memory of her mother and father. Tears welled up in her eyes as her face twisted in sorrow, silently begging for forgiveness for being a constant source of worry and failing to grow stronger. Overwhelmed by painful memories of her past, she cried out in agony, weeping as apologies poured from her lips. Driven by sheer panic, the young girl launched herself forward in a reckless assault, startling her opponent. She leapt high into the air, bringing her training sword down with an explosive burst of force that stunned the watching spectators. Unexpected ferocity of the strike pushed her opponent back, forcing him into a desperate guard, as she immediately pivoted for another blow. Struggling to manage the height difference, her sparring partner realized how difficult it was to protect his lower body against her rapid footwork. He considered disarming her, but feared causing even a minor injury with his strength. Called out, conceding the match and begging her to stop, but her glassy eyes showed she was completely deaf to his shouts. Sweat beaded on his brow as he realized the escalation had crossed into dangerous territory. Deep down, his true terror was not the child herself, but the terrifying consequences he would face if he accidentally harmed someone so precious to his lord. Before the situation could worsen, the noble lord stepped forward calmly, taking control and relieving the overwhelmed opponent. A quick wave of his hand, he summoned a torrent of water to douse the frenzy and cool the wild child's head. Stepping directly into her path, he wrapped his arms tightly around her to cushion her fall, bringing the frantic assault to a gentle, quiet halt as she blinked up at him in surprise. Outside under the pouring rain, Celeste kneels on the damp ground, pulling Yui into a tight, protective embrace. Standing nearby, Wilziel calls out to him, watching the tender moment unfold. Raindrops mix with tears as he cradles the child close to his chest, his face filled with overwhelming emotion and relief. Looking up into his eyes, she softly stammers his name, overwhelmed by his sudden show of affection. He gazes down at her with a tender, gentle smile, asking softly if the water had hurt her, while she stumbles over her words in response. Stepping forward, Wilziel quickly clarifies that his magic was never intended to harm her. Celeste quietly reassures him that he already understands. Turning to his companion, he offers his gratitude, revealing that he had observed the whole situation from the corridor. His friend accepts the thanks with a quiet nod. Gently addressing the young girl, he invites her to come along with him out of the cold downpour. He looks up at him with tear-filled eyes, asking if he feels cold. He reassures her that he is fine, explaining that dragons are naturally resilient to temperature shifts, particularly given his water magic. Interjecting gently, Wilziel reminds him that the child before them is only an ordinary human. He explains that her frail body cannot withstand the elements like theirs, warning that she could catch a cold if she remains drenched. Regretful for his oversight, he quickly apologizes for not realizing it sooner. During their conversation, she nervously looks down and asks if there is any work or duty she ought to be fulfilling for him. Gazes at her with deep affection, softly acknowledging her modest question. Reassures her that while some young children are forced to work, she does not need to worry about that. He clarifies that when adopting a human child, financial assistance is provided by the state. Approaching the group, Valentine chimes in with a warm expression, confirming that she truly has nothing to worry about. He stood quietly as Celeste offered reassurance, explaining that despite his appearance, he earned a solid income and could fully support his partner. Looking gently down at her, he asks softly if she truly enjoyed fighting. Memories of past violence flashed through her mind, painful reminders of the blood and suffering she had witnessed. With a solemn expression, she confessed that she had no desire to get hurt or to inflict harm on others. During her heartfelt response, he smiled warmly and advised her to choose a path she loved when the right time came. Suggested starting with learning to read and write, emphasizing that illiteracy would be a major hurdle no matter what career she chose. Child gave a small, quiet nod of agreement, accepting his guidance. Stepping forward, Valentine offered to dry Celeste with magic while reminding her to put on her coat so she wouldn't catch cold. Standing in the open area, she turned her gaze toward Wilziel as he approached. Squatting down to her level, Wilziel noted how stubborn she was, recalling that he had already offered his assistance. Paused thoughtfully, admitting his honest perspective on the situation. Confessed that his opinion of her had changed slightly, acknowledging that although she was strong-willed, she remained vulnerable to being hurt. Reminded her of the harsh realities of the world, pointing out those who had fallen ill, suffered injuries, or lost their lives. Looking at her intently, he expressed his gratitude that she had managed to survive without coming to harm. Calling her over to shelter, he encouraged her to step inside out of the gathering cold wind. He watched silently as Wilziel stood nearby, resting his hand on his sword sheath while reflecting softly on his nature, uncertain if his earnest demeanor was simple seriousness or just who he truly was. Inside, Celeste checked on Yui to see if her clothes had dried, while confirming to her that Valentine was indeed one of the most capable mages serving in the guard. Thanked her gently for her care, holding her securely on his lap as Yui realized with a flush how naturally she had settled into his comforting presence. Outside in the courtyard, Dissy playfully sparred with Charles, protesting loudly that sweeping at her with his massive reptilian tail was entirely unfair during their match. Observing the lively commotion from the doorway, Valentine and Celeste noted how energetic Dissy was, enjoying her spirited, active nature. Turning his gaze toward the elf, Celeste abruptly addressed Valentine, his serene demeanor shifting into something far more sharp and focused. Holding Yui tightly against his chest, he questioned in a calm yet chilling voice why he detected another man's scent clinging to her besides his own. Clarifying that it did not belong to Wilziel, Celeste wore a terrifyingly polite smile that caused the temperature in the room to plummet, leaving both Wilziel and Yui frozen in absolute dread. As the realization set in, the noble lord contemplated how the young child had taken a curious interest in Charles's reptilian scales. It made sense now why the lizardman warrior had permitted her to touch his arm, leaving behind a lingering scent on her. Meanwhile, near the training area, the dragon girl swung her sword in mild frustration, realizing Charles must have been delighted to find someone who wasn't afraid of him, rendering her own efforts to stand out meaningless. She continued praising Charles as the strongest and best warrior, while the child softly agreed, admiring his impressive strength. Overhearing their praises, Lord Celeste lowered his gaze, a quiet shift coming over his demeanor, reached out gently, grasping the child's cloak to pause her in her tracks. Turning back toward him, she tilted her head in confusion as he let out a quiet sigh. He asked her softly if she had enjoyed touching Charles's scales, prompting a startled look from her. Timidly, the young girl asked Lord Celeste if he was feeling angry with her. Maintaining a calm facade, he quietly assured her that he wasn't angry. He covered his face, attempting to explain the unsettling nature of detecting another man's scent on someone close, admitting his own internal struggle despite knowing she meant no harm. Realizing that dragons possess an intensely possessive nature, the young girl pieced together his words and asked directly if he was feeling jealous, apologized, acknowledging her freedom to make friends with whomever she wished. Yet his expression remained visibly pained as she recognized the deep emotion troubling him. Observing her own small hands, she reflected on how much stronger she had become compared to her past self. Sitting beside him on the bench, she pondered concepts like marriage and lifelong partnerships, realizing that even her past life provided no experience with romantic love. Looking at his pained, downcast face, she realized with a heavy heart that his distress was caused entirely by her actions. He offered a quiet apology, her head bowed in remorse. Taken aback by her sudden apology, his eyes widened in surprise as he questioned what she meant. Feeling to meet her gaze, he gently insisted that she had done nothing wrong and had no reason to apologize, taking the entire blame upon himself. He confessed that he was the one who had taken her, simply because she was his destined partner, acknowledging that he had unfairly forced that expectation onto her. As the chime rang for the third time, he abruptly excused himself to return to his duties, leaving her calling after him in worry. Placing a comforting hand on her head, he urged her not to dwell on the matter before turning to entrust her care to his loyal high elf retainer, while her companion watched on with deep concern. Once he was gone, the elf expressed sincere regret for failing to anticipate how intensely dragons bond with their partners, but she gently reassured him that he was not to blame. Grateful for her forgiving nature, the elf bowed slightly and thanked her for her kindness. Internally, he chided himself for his own recklessness, realizing how severely he had misjudged the delicate situation. Turning to the lizardman warrior beside him, he asked whether he had sensed the extraordinary magical energy emanating from the young girl. Recalled how exceptionally rare it was for a human child to possess such formidable magic, remembering her fierce display of strength during combat. Meanwhile, her young friend asked if she intended to follow after the Lord, but she quietly shook her head in refusal. Walking down the corridor alone, the Lord resolved that the time was not right to confront his overwhelming feelings. Retreating to his private quarters, he stared down at his trembling hand in quiet contemplation. Slumping into a chair, he tried to rationalize the situation, reminding himself that she was merely a human child. Touching his head in agony, he acknowledged that humans cannot sense their destined partners, and that her background as a former slave made her unaware of her true place. Yet he could not shake the unsettling torment of knowing another man had touched her. Couldn't even begin to grasp the underlying reasons for his internal turmoil, gazing absently toward the light framing the windowsill as his mind spiraled deeper into confusion. Burying his face in his hands, he wrestled with the agonizing impulses tearing through his thoughts. Vivid memories of Yui's gentle kindness flooded his mind, alongside a fierce possessive need to keep her by his side and ensure no one else could ever touch her. Lapsing to his knees beside the bed, he tried to convince himself that his feelings were merely a dragon's primal instincts driven by fate rather than genuine affection. Torn between raw desire and intense jealousy, he questioned whether this overwhelming bond was nothing more than an illusion, even as a desperate hunger to know her deeper consumed him. As her delicate face lingered in his mind, he felt paralyzed by the fear of pushing too close and driving her away, terrified of hearing an answer that might confirm his worst anxieties. Tears welled in his eyes at the mere thought of her rejection, terrified of what uncontrolled monster he might become if she ultimately turned him away. Exhausted by the emotional heavy burden, he retreated into the corridor, leaning against the wall in silence as servants passed by in quiet concern. Breathing a heavy sigh, he stood alone in the hallway, while the staff respectfully went about their duties. Looking through the window glass, he acknowledged the dangerous nature of dragon instincts, and recognized that while he had stepped away to avoid losing control, running away forever was not an option. Turning to face Valentine, he resolved that, as a dragon who had finally found his destined partner, he had no choice but to face his destiny head-on. Recalled Yui's earnest expression when she asked to understand what it truly meant to be a dragon's partner, realizing her willingness to learn held the path forward. Sitting together in the brightly lit dining hall, Valentine began to answer Yui's question about the nature of soulmates. He explained that for Dragonkin, a soulmate represents a sacred, irreplaceable existence, prompting him to ask how much the children truly understood about the concept. Looking up thoughtfully, Yui recalled what her mother had once told her long ago, that a soulmate is a destined partner, someone specifically chosen by the gods. Nodding in agreement, Valentine offered to explain the key differences between the world's various races. He noted that while demons like Charles resided in Glanzell, the city's population was primarily divided into 5 main humanoid races. He began by detailing the Dragonkin, describing them as a powerful race endowed with formidable bodies and strong innate magic, growing steadily stronger as they age. He noted their physical traits, slit pupils, sharp fangs, and tall statures, while warning that younger Dragonkin tend to possess fiercer tempers, making someone as calm as Celeste exceptionally rare. He warned them that an angry Dragonkin poses a grave threat. The children giggled mischievously, whispering that since Celeste was always so kind, his anger must be truly terrifying to behold. Moving on to his own kind, Valentine described the elves as people of the forest, who, despite lacking the physical might of Dragonkin, are born with formidable magical abilities. He added that while they traditionally resided in woodlands, more elves had recently begun living in urban cities. Continued outlining the remaining races, describing the stout yet sturdy dwarves who excel as master craftsmen, alongside the physically diverse beastkin who boast unmatched sensory keenness and superior physical abilities. Finally, he addressed the human race, pointing out that humans exhibit the widest variation in individual potential. Many lack magical gifts entirely, while others possess power they cannot harness. With their numbers dwindling drastically, humans are now classified as a protected species. Turning to the topic of soulmates, Valentine emphasized that among all human races, Dragonkin possess the sharpest, most overwhelming instincts. The moment a Dragonkin encounters their soulmate, they recognize them instantaneously. Recalled the overwhelming sensation Celeste experienced, a sudden heat coursing through his blood and an indelible mark binding his soul to hers from the very moment their eyes met, even across a great distance. Gazing down thoughtfully, Yui confessed her quiet affection for Celeste, wondering aloud if her fondness meant that they were indeed soulmates. Seeing her uncertainty, Valentine gently reassured her, explaining that a Dragonkin is granted only a single soulmate in their entire lifetime. Reassuring the anxious child, he declared firmly that she would never be abandoned, for Celeste's designated soulmate was none other than her. Surprised by the revelation, Yui felt a sudden wave of relief wash over her, prompting Valentine to encourage her to reflect deeply on what that bond truly meant. Left her with a gentle probing question, asking if having someone so entirely devoted to her would make her want to remain by their side forever. She recalled the memories of her original parents in her former life, remembering how seeing their loving faces gave her strength even through the pain of her terminal illness. Holding their hands tightly as her life slipped away, she had expressed her deep gratitude to them for everything. Yet, despite all her effort to hold on, her body had ultimately succumbed in that hospital bed. Final lingering desire had been simply to stay by the side of those she loved for just a little longer. Turning to the present, she was brought out of her internal monologue as a gentle voice called out her name. Valentine explained that for Dragonkin, possessiveness over their bond is overwhelmingly powerful, driven by an instinctual terror of losing their cherished person or picking up another's scent on them. Went on to share that Celeste's parents were a Dragonkin and an elf of different races, yet they remained deeply happy together throughout their lives. Continuing his explanation, he reassured her that being a Dragonkin's soulmate ensured she would never have to struggle to survive. When Wilziel was mentioned, Valentine chucked, noting that while the young man was obsessed with friendship in his own twisted way, Celeste was no different in his devotion. Reflecting on those words, the young girl quietly admitted to herself that Wilziel was indeed strange and somewhat intimidating. Valentine pressed gently, asking if there had ever been a single moment where she truly hated being with Celeste, noting that their soulmate bond was blessed by the gods themselves. He contemplated his words, contrasting Valentine's gentle demeanor with the profound warmth she felt whenever Celeste reached out to touch her. Looking down at her hands, she recognized the soft tenderness behind every gesture Celeste made. Valentine reassured her that defining their relationship was entirely up to her, whether as partners, close friends, or family, since a soulmate bond doesn't dictate how they must live. Concluded by softly requesting that she at least consider Celeste's feelings even just a little, leaving her with a warm smile. As the elf offered his gentle advice, the young girl quietly lowered her head, taking his words to heart as she admitted to herself that she never wanted to bring pain to Celeste. Smiling warmly, he thanked her and expressed his wish that Celeste could hear those heartfelt thoughts directly, before a sudden idea struck him. Eagerly proposed that she write Celeste a letter, assuring her that he would adore receiving it and pointing out that practice was the finest way to master new words. Suggestion sparked instant excitement, with 17's eyes gleaming as she delightedly anticipated receiving letters of her own. As Yui considered the thought, memories of her former life drifted back to her, a time when spoken words failed her, but reading books had been her quiet sanctuary. Wasting no time, Valentine set out lesson materials on the desk to teach them the fundamentals, but when he presented the very first symbol, Yui froze in utter disbelief. Moved on to the next character without noticing her paralysis, while 17 turned to ask what had caught her so completely off guard. Staring down at the practice page, Yui recognized the distinct symbols laid out before her, a familiar hiragana chart from the world of her past life. Examining the strange chart of symbols, Yui realized that despite the unfamiliar shapes, the underlying phonetic patterns were identical to what he knew. Valentine observed his quick understanding, encouraging him to practice writing while looking at the characters. Side by side at the desk, the children focused intently on their studies, their quills scratching across the parchment as they carefully traced each character. As Valentine watched over their progress, encouraging them as writing became easier, Dissy suddenly gasped in surprise at a sudden movement. She beamed with pride after asking for help, realizing she could now spell out Valentine's full name, while Yui quietly worked beside her. Valentine praised both children lavishly for their remarkable memory and speed, confident they would master reading and writing before the day was out. Overjoyed by the compliments, Dissy smiled brightly as Valentine gently rested a hand on her head in warm approval. Catching Yui offered a rare, subtle smile. The others pointed it out in delight, admiring how cute he looked when showing genuine emotion. Transitioning to their next lesson, Valentine suggested writing a letter to Celeste, teasingly noting how jealous Celeste would be, while Yui carefully set his pen to paper. His clumsy, newly learned script, Yui painstakingly began writing down a sincere apology for what had transpired that day. Study session continued quietly in the sunlit room, with Yui absorbed in penning his thoughts onto the page. As time passed and the clock chimed, Wilziel entered the room and was unexpectedly caught off guard when Yui ran over to embrace him warmly. Valentine proudly explained that Yui was now capable of writing simple messages on his own, offering a letter the boy had crafted for Wilziel. Wilziel began reading the letter, in which Yui expressed his joy at learning to write despite finding the pen difficult to handle. Continuing through the message, Wilziel read Yui's heartfelt gratitude toward everyone who gave him a chance, provided light in the house, and offered wisdom. The letter concluded with deeply emotional words from Yui, thanking Wilziel for saving his life when he stood on the very verge of death. As he read through the written message, the simple lines detailed every small act of kindness he had shown, thanking him for the warm bed, the shelter, and for letting her remain by Dissy's side. The letter continued with endless gratitude, recalling how he had walked slowly so she could keep pace, shared his food, listened to her words, and protected her from the freezing waters. Every honest line reflected a child's pure appreciation, offering heartfelt thanks for every gesture of gentle care. Above all, she expressed her deepest gratitude for the name he had bestowed upon her, prompting a quiet, emotional smile as he promised to treasure her words forever. Kneeling down to face her directly, he explained that his actions stemmed from the deep connection they shared as Dragon Master and partner. He admitted that while he took her in and cared for her because of that bond, his true romantic feelings remained uncertain and complex. Though he had been advised to remain cautious with others, he promised to devote his utmost effort to ensure she would never be harmed. Openly questioned whether his devotion was born of love or duty, struggling to define what she truly meant to him. He reassured him with unwavering patience, reminding him that as long-lived dragons, they had 1,000 years if needed for him to understand his heart, asking only that he teach her and learn about her in return. Expressing her equal desire to understand him completely, she stepped forward into a warm, reassuring embrace as he comforted her with the reminder that time was entirely on their side. Later in the quiet study area, the household gathered peacefully as lessons and daily routines resumed. Dissy happily enjoyed sweet treats provided by Celine, praising the head maid's exceptional culinary talent while eating alongside Yui. Meanwhile, the tall master focused quietly on his own reading, reflecting on the heavy demands of study. Reflecting on her past, Dissy recalled her human village where literacy was non-existent, expressing her profound joy at finally being granted the chance to learn. He nurtured a quiet hope that once her strength fully returned, she could experience a normal life, studying, playing, and sharing treats with friends. Hand rested softly in another's, a gentle touch confirming the warmth and security of the bonds she had formed. Surrounded by such warmth, she felt immense happiness to simply study alongside her cherished friends, praying in her heart that this newfound peace would never slip away. Strolling through the cobblestone streets lined with elegant storefronts, the tall noble observed that the wardrobe at home was far from sufficient. When the young girl voiced her quiet worries about the cost, he gently reassured her that money was of no concern. He soon stopped outside a charming, high-end boutique where he invited her to pick out anything that caught her eye. Stepping inside the shop, they were warmly welcomed by the attendants. He explained that they had come to purchase a complete wardrobe for the young child, prompting the clerk to inquire about her preferred colors. Requested a full arrangement including undergarments, sleepwear, and matching shoes to complement every ensemble. Nodding respectfully, the clerk offered to guide them to the fitting area. Among the displays, a cape woven from fine snow spider silk caught their attention, designed for elegant daily wear. Woven from threads harvested from creatures inhabiting snowy mountain peaks, these garments offered year-round comfort and were traditionally given as cherished gifts to mark a child's coming of age. Unsure of the process, the young child nervously asked if she needed to disrobe entirely, but he knelt to soothe her fears, explaining that the attendant was simply there to assist her with trying on the clothes. Watching the pair interact, the staff whispered among themselves about their striking appearance, wondering if he was her father or older brother, while privately hoping such generous dragon customers would frequent their store for years to come. Moments later, she stepped out wearing an ornate, frilly dress complete with delicate ribbons and a matching bonnet, leaving him completely awestruck by her appearance. Fidgeting nervously under his gaze, she asked if the outfit looked strange on her, but he quickly assured her that she looked absolutely stunning. Whirling gently to test the dress, she listened as he reiterated how adorable she looked, inquiring if the garment felt comfortable enough for her to move freely. Without a second thought, he announced to the bowing shopkeepers that he would purchase the entire outfit she was wearing immediately. Gently leaning down once more, he asked if she would like to try on a few more outfits, to which she gave a pleased nod. Staff eagerly presented additional options, suggesting stylish trousers and soft colors that would suit her equally well. She happily tried on various matching shoes and accessories brought by the boutique attendants, while Celeste ensured that every piece she favored would be purchased for her without hesitation. Watching her delight, Celeste felt a quiet warmth bloom inside him. Reflected on his past, recalling how odd it had once seemed when his dragon father endlessly showered his mother with fine garments and gifts. Now seeing her gentle joy, he finally understood that deep impulse. Looking at the exquisite shoes and treasures set before her, brought a pure, simple feeling of happiness that warmed her heart. The clerk politely calculated the total price to be well over 10 large gold pieces. Celeste casually instructed them to buy every single item and have them delivered directly to their residence, keeping only her current outfit on. Kneeling closer to her, he gently patted her head and offered a warm compliment, telling her how genuinely adorable she looked. Touched by his unconditional warmth and care, her face softened into a tender smile as quiet gratitude filled her eyes. Surprised by her rare and delicate smile, Celeste asked if she was enjoying herself, to which she softly affirmed her joy and voiced her heartfelt gratitude toward him. After concluding their lavish outing, the two strolled back toward the grand estate, bound by a newfound closeness and comfort in each other's presence. Back inside the quiet comfort of their quarters, Celeste relaxed in a rocking chair while reflecting with satisfaction on how smoothly the outing had gone, pleased that the shop assistant had been accommodating. Looking over at her playing quietly on the rug, he felt content knowing he had gained a better understanding of her personal tastes in clothing. Curiosity sparked within her, prompting her to lean closer and ask if he would share more details about himself and his family background. Obligingly, he explained his heritage, detailing how his parents and twin brothers loved traveling. After he reached maturity, his parents departed Grantser with his brothers, who eventually became capital knights, though because of their wandering nature he had not heard from them in decades. Wondering if he ever felt anxious about their absence, she asked if he worried, but he reassured her that with an elf mother and a dragon father skilled in magic, their exceptionally long lifespans meant long stretches without contact were completely normal. Pondering his mixed lineage, she asked whether he himself was a half-blood between dragon and elf, prompting him to ponder her phrasing about his unique bloodline. Listened patiently as she inquired whether he was an equal mix of both races, with a dragon father and an elf mother. Explained that when parents belong to two different species, offspring are born strictly as one or the other. Thus, while he was born a dragon, his twin brothers were elves. When she curiously asked about his siblings, he recalled that they were roughly 170 years old, only slightly older than her in human terms, and noted how exceedingly rare elven twins were. Reminiscing about their youth, he described how his energetic brothers used wind magic to stir up endless mischief, often braiding his hair into pigtails while he slept, a habit that influenced how he styled his hair today. As he shared these memories, he gently called her name, realizing she had settled against him. Exhausted from their long day, she softly drifted off to sleep against his chest. Gazing down at her peaceful face, he wondered if changing into so many outfits had worn her out, silently recalling the tradition that children who sleep well grow well. As her eyelids closed fully, he offered silent blessings for her to sleep, play, eat, and grow strong. Quiet contemplation settled over him, wondering how long such fleeting, precious moments would endure before she grew into a mature young lady who might eventually fall in love with another. Holding the sleeping girl tightly in the quiet chamber, he softly wished for time to slow down, looking forward to shopping for her in every coming season. Meanwhile, in another wing of the estate, Celine and the household maids unpacked the endless boxes of newly purchased dresses, light-heartedly whispering about how their master simply could not resist spoiling the child. Examining a delicate hair accessory among the garments, the head maid smiled quietly at the warmth and love that now filled the mansion. Celeste declared with a serene smile that he had finally found his soulmate, a revelation that brought overjoyed congratulations from those around him. Yet for her, that joyful announcement felt like nothing short of a crushing death sentence. Calling his striking features, his mesmerizing bright blue hair and golden eyes, she knew that by the time she realized her feelings, she was already deeply in love. Though many dragons in human form possessed distinct beauty, Celeste surpassed them all in her eyes, being kinder and far more elegant than anyone else. Upon coming to terms with the truth that dragons recognize their true mates instantly, she wept bitterly, knowing she was not the one destined for him. Her deepest sorrow, a desperate wish formed within her heart. If she could not be his soulmate, she hoped he would not find his until after she had passed away. Despite knowing her place, watching Celeste shower affection on another brought an agonizing heartache that no amount of resolve could soothe. He could only watch in silent anguish as he embraced a frail child named Adelaide, wondering in despair why fate had not chosen her instead. Shifting back to the present duties, Celine composed herself and instructed the maid to prepare tea after the meal for young Yui. As the tray was set down in the quiet dining space, the young child offered a quiet word of thanks. Taking a sip of the warm milk tea, the child remarked on its soothing flavor while Celine observed in silent contemplation. Celeste then entered to inform Yui that today's lessons were cancelled, explaining that guards needed to question him regarding the events at the slave arena. Understanding the child's unspoken anxiety, Celeste reassured him that he would remain by his side even if Dissy was placed in another room. Looking down with a gentle and reassuring gaze, he prepared to guide the boy through the upcoming ordeal. They prepared to leave the estate. He softly reminded Yui of his inner strength, offered a gentle greeting as they prepared to meet the visiting investigators. Officials requested their cooperation, though Celeste noted that Yui might feel uncomfortable around male officers, prompting the female officer to step forward in support. Greeting Yui warmly, the officer asked if she remembered him as the man from beneath the arena whom she had kicked. Vivid memory flashed across her mind, reminding her of that chaotic moment underground. She offered an apology. The officer hastily waved his hands, insisting that he was the one who should apologize for frightening her back then. The atmosphere eased. Celeste suggested they all move inside to begin the discussion. Glancing back along the open corridor, Yui caught sight of movement further down the walkway. Without warning, the captive tiger beastkin burst into a furious roar, shouting for number 8 and bellowing about his soulmate. The officer gasped in confusion, noting that the beastkin's interrogation was not scheduled until the afternoon, just as metal chains shattered violently. Breaking free from his restraints, the monstrous beast lunged forward in a rage, laying all blame upon her as Yui froze in terror. A fraction of a second, Celeste swept her into his arms, pulling her safely against his chest. Razor-sharp point of ice materialized instantly, stopping mere millimeters from the beastkin's eye. The subtle gesture of his hand, high-grade ice magic coalesced seamlessly out of thin air. Deadly spires of crystalline ice hovered suspended in the quiet air. Holding Yui securely with one arm, Celeste extended his hand, threatening the attacker with a massive blade of ice held directly against his face. His cold, sharp gaze locked onto the attacker through the translucent shimmer of his icy magic. Recognizing the noble's terrifying power, the beastkin growled in frustration, realizing he was facing his formidable adversary once more. Spat out the infamous title of the Blue Dragon, acknowledging the overwhelming strength before him. Seizing a split second of distraction, the beastkin broke free and leapt away from the guards attempting to surround him. Shattering the surrounding stone walls, the beast launched himself into full flight while the guards bellowed orders to secure the perimeter and send for immediate reinforcements. Amidst the chaos, the noble rushed to comfort the shaken child, gently asking if he could stand. Trembling with remorse, the young boy sobbed out apologies as his savior gathered him tightly into a protective embrace, noting internally how remarkable it was that the child showed no fear despite the terrifying scale of the incident. Observing the boy's quiet resilience, his benefactor watched over him with silent, lingering concern. Sometime later outside the estate, Celine stepped out into the courtyard carrying a heavy basket of laundry, grumbling under her breath about her tedious chores. Hanging up the garments on the line, she vented her frustration aloud, wondering why she had been tasked with washing someone else's clothing. Unfolding an extraordinarily large tunic, she marveled at its absurd size while thinking of Lord Celeste, until a sudden rustle in the bushes startled her completely. Emerging from the greenery, the rogue beastkin lurked low to the ground, glaring menacingly as he growled that she carried the distinct scent of number 8. Lurking near the estate grounds, the massive tiger beastkin catches a familiar scent upon the maid, instantly recognizing the distinct smell of number 8. Catching sight of a small human child with flaxen hair in the distance, he mutters in disbelief, questioning if that skinny brat could truly be number 8. Terrified by his sudden aggression, the maid shrieks in terror, suddenly realizing that the monstrous beast is hunting the very child brought to safety. Meanwhile, the conversation turns toward Lord Celeste, as the intruder realizes that the Blue Dragonkin's residence is where the runaway has taken shelter. Towering over the cowering maid, the beastkin growls in fury that a mere slave dared to defy his master, promising a brutal re-education. Trying to negotiate through her dread, she nervously asks if he truly desires to capture that young boy. Desperate for safety, she attempts to bargain, asking if the dangerous figure can swear to protect both her and her mother from harm in exchange for information. Vicious beast flashes a predatory grin, caught slightly off guard by her bold proposition. Boasts that while adult slaves hold little interest, a human child, especially number 8, is worth an extraordinary fortune. Back inside the quiet hallway of the estate, Lord Celeste steps inside, carrying the exhausted child tightly against his chest, met by anxious queries from the household staff regarding the commotion outside. Cradling the fragile boy tenderly in his arms, the gentle noble whispers comforting words, asking if he feels able to eat a little dinner. Recognizing the emotional strain, he politely dismisses Celine for the evening, explaining that he will dine only after things have settled down. Observing the delicate bond between the master and the young child, the staff members quietly agree to leave them in peace for the night. Quiescing to his wishes, Celine softly agrees to leave, offering to keep a meal prepared so it can be warmed up whenever needed. Ensuring the residence remains secure from external threats, they double-check that the back door is firmly locked before departing for the night. He stepped out of the room, leaving the door to latch firmly behind her as Celeste took over hosting duties. Offering to prepare tea while taking his leave to put away his coat, Celeste promised the young boy he would return shortly. Left alone in the quiet dining hall, the child sat in silence, waiting patient and small in the expansive room. Suddenly, a subtle sound echoed down the hallway, catching his attention and causing him to turn his head toward the entrance. The door creaked open slowly of its own accord, casting a wide beam of hall light across the dim room as the boy watched intently. Meanwhile, up in his quarters, unbuttoned his coat, his thoughts drifting to the dangerous beastkin still lurking uncaught out in the city. Reflecting on the cat tribe's expert stealth and squad tracking protocols, he calmly removed his vest, considering it only a matter of time before the intruder was captured. Sudden disturbance below shattered the silence. Celeste bolted toward the balcony, crying out in alarm as he spotted a massive shadow invading the hall. Tiger Beastkin had breached the estate without making a sound, lunging instantly into the room to seize his target before Celeste could reach them. Clamping a heavy furred hand tightly over the boy's mouth, the intruder silenced the boy completely, holding him helpless in his powerful grip. Haunting the quiet child with malicious amusement, the beastkin mocked how expressionless and uncute number 8 remained despite being captured. Celeste rushed down the stairs in a flurry of motion, his eyes burning with intense fury as he unleashed a wave of magic and commanded the intruder to stop. Moved by the display, the captor mockingly questioned if this terrified little brat was truly Celeste's mate, holding the boy hostage like a shield. Celeste paused mid-step, his mind racing as he picked up on a specific word uttered by the beastkin intruder. Beastkin sneered, declaring that they were not stupid enough to face a formidable dragonkin in a head-to-head battle. Taunted that for a dragonkin, a mate meant everything, knowing they could never defy such a bond, all while holding the child firmly in his massive claws under the noble lord's intense stare. Pressing his sharp claws deeper into the young boy's chest until the fabric tore, the beastkin barked stern demands at Lord Celeste, ordering him to lower his arms, freeze, and refrain from chanting any magic, threatening to slice the child's belly open at the slightest resistance. Celeste slowly lowered his arms in silent compliance, his expression remaining cold and composed despite the gravity of the situation, while the terrified child gasped for air beneath the heavy pressure of the Beastkin master snaps his clawed hand against the young girl's throat, barking a deadly ultimatum at the lord standing before him, demanding he lower his arms immediately or he will rip her stomach open. Without waiting for a response, the massive Beastkin lunges forward and violently grips the noble by the face, crushing his head against the wall with brute strength. Boasting about the legendary vulnerability of Dragonkin when protecting their mates, the monster mockingly observes how helpless his noble opponent has become, promising to crush his head entirely so he can never pursue them again. Watching the horrific violence unfold, she is paralyzed by dark memories of past cruelty, recalling how defying a master only ever led to brutal suffering and punishment. Overwhelmed by helplessness and fear, the child weakly reaches toward him, whispering his name while despairing over her identity as a powerless slave. She remembers the harsh law of her past, where absolute submission was the only permitted response to any command. Though trauma had long stripped away her ability to shed tears, an unbearable surge of emotion still swells within her chest. At that crucial second, the Dragon Lord's sharp eyes snap open with intense fury, startling the Beastkin master with a sudden change in atmosphere. Fear urges her to flee. A far stronger impulse takes hold of her soul, a desperate refusal to let Lord Celeste die. The image of his kind smile flashes through her mind, driving away her hesitation. With newfound resolve, she buries her teeth deep into the Beastkin's thick arm with vicious force. Caught completely off guard, the monster recoils in shock as her desperate bite draws blood. Raged by the unexpected defiance, he violently hurls the child across the room, cursing at her in fury. Before she can strike the ground, the Dragon Lord moves like lightning, catching her tenderly in his arms and breaking her fall. Drove the Beastkin brute straight into the ground, pinning him down effortlessly while an onlooker watched from a nearby window in utter disbelief. Beastkin grunted under the relentless pressure, unable to loosen the grip around his throat. Despite hands that appeared slender and delicate, the iron grip refused to yield even an inch against the attacker's desperate struggles. Shocked by the inhuman strength pressing against his windpipe, the Beastkin cursed in disbelief. Cold, terrifying fury surged within Celeste as he stared down at the monster who dared to harm his mate. Maintaining his crush grip, Celeste confessed with icy malice that he had been holding back until now, but intended to make the beast suffer in equal measure. Brute gagged and writhed violently, yet remained entirely helpless beneath the nobleman's grasp. Frost rapidly crackled across the Beastkin's body, crystalline shards of ice creeping across his skin. Panic seized the Beastkin. Celeste uttered a single command, sealing the captor in a prison of solid ice. Silence returned to the courtyard as the fully encrusted attacker lay immobilized, with Celeste keeping 8 held safely against his shoulder. Expression softened entirely as he gazed down at the exhausted girl clinging to his side. Voice called out from beyond the fence, as Wilzeal arrived on horseback to assess the situation while Celeste gently whispered Yui's name. Reining in his horse, Wilzeal observed the frozen enemy in the quiet scene before him. Approaching on foot, Wilzeal explained that a surge of massive magic had guided him directly to the location, and inquired after the state of the prisoner. Holding the young girl tenderly in his arms, Celeste requested backup for a transport wagon, to which the surrounding guard immediately agreed. Offered a quiet apology for nearly executing the Beastkin master in his fury. As Wilzeal examined the frozen intruder, he pondered aloud whether the beastman's severed arm could ever be reattached. Celeste reasoned that any man who laid a hand on a child deserved nothing less, while the fox-eared medic applied a protective magic coating to the intruder, noting that treating a body soaked in ice magic would be difficult but manageable. Turning his attention back to the young boy, he knelt down gently, apologizing for frightening him with his overwhelming display of power and promising that the beastman would never come near him again. Looking back with tear-stained eyes, Yui shook his head and declared softly that if such danger ever arose again, he would fight for himself next time. Hearing those brave words, Celeste stared at the boy in stunned silence, his heart swelling as he softly spoke Yui's name. Truth echoed across the battle-scared ground between them. The young boy's presence had truly saved him from giving in to dark impulses. Overcome with emotion, he pulled Yui into a tight, warm embrace, holding him close as the tension from the fight finally ebbed away. Pulling back slightly, Yui noticed the bloody injury on Celeste's arm and reached out with concern, but the silver-haired nobleman gently reassured him that he was fine. Gathering light magic at his fingertips, Celeste applied a soothing healing spell directly onto his damaged shoulder, mending the tissue within seconds. He offered Yui a reassuring smile, reminding the boy that despite his cold appearance during battle, he still served as a dedicated healer for the security squad. Meanwhile, Yui checked Wilzeal's head for injuries, relieved to find no bumps, while the others pondered how an intruder could have located a Dragonkin sanctuary in the first place. As the immediate crisis settled, Celeste walked toward the open doorway, gazing out into the quiet hallway while Yui watched him attentively. Catching a sudden scent on the air, he paused, prompting Yui to ask if something was wrong. His eyes narrowed with intense suspicion as an unfamiliar scent wafted through the doorway, heralding an unexpected presence. Inside the quiet manor, sunlight filtered through a shattered window frame. The realization that a slave trader had dared to target young Yui hung heavily in the cool morning air. Adjusting his collar, Celeste expressed his profound relief that both Celine and the young child were unharmed. He instructed the headmaid to oversee the household during his brief absence, and to ensure the damaged window was promptly repaired, receiving a quiet nod of compliance in return. Watching them closely, a maid clenched the fabric of her apron in silent distress. She recalled how the terrifying beastman attacker had explicitly vowed not to harm Lord Celeste. Her eyes narrowed with a bitter, simmering resentment as a troubling question consumed her mind. Frustrated memories surfaced, making her question why it was always the same girl who received everyone's protection and concern. Meanwhile, the young child sat quietly on the stone steps outside, gazing ahead with a contemplative expression. Observing from the doorway, the maid harbored growing jealousy toward the young child, who had even dared to stand tall before her master. Outside, Celeste gently reassured the little girl that everything would be fine. The child stood on the grand staircase, confident in her own strength. Vivid memories of a past tragedy violently rushed back into her mind. That dark memory, ruthless beastmen invaders raided their home, shouting orders to slaughter the men and elders while taking the women and children captive. Amidst the terrifying chaos, her devoted elder sister screamed for her to hide. The young girl had desperately fought back against the towering attackers, dodging blows as the lead beastman mocked her feisty nature. Despite her valiant efforts, the massive warrior easily pinned the young girl to the ground. Grabbing her by the face, the beastman grinned wickedly, noting her impressive agility and musing that she would make an ideal combat slave with proper training. Terrified for her younger sibling, the pinned girl screamed out in protest as another brute seized the helpless child, who cried out desperately for her sister. Brutal captor pulled the trembling child close, sneering that her fierce spirit would make her quite popular at the slave market. He cried out desperately for him to stop, but the beastkin captor only sneered, mocking that her little brother would make a fine toy for his new owner. Tears streaming down her face, the young girl pleaded to behave, begging only for permission to stay with her younger brother. After the ruthless beating, the captor walked away from the cell, leaving her bruised and groaning on the cold floor as she weakly reached out for her sibling. Standing over her, the captor mockingly questioned if she had only fought back earlier out of fear of dying, taunting her to fight like her life depended on it. Realizing with horror that she might never see her brother again, she surged forward with a wooden club, screaming in sheer desperation. The pit of the gambling arena, spectators gossiped about the newcomer matched against the formidable, battle-trained number 8, while ambient chants to kill echoed around her. Armed with a blade, she stood in the dusty arena, facing the small, quiet child appointed as her opponent. The child across from her stared back with hollow, vacant eyes, completely stripped of emotion. Seeing the tiny girl before her, she paused, struck by how remarkably young and small her opponent truly was. Sensing her grip on the sword, she wrestled with the cruel reality. If she lost, she would die, but if she won, she would have to kill a mere child. Instead of striking, she lowered her weapon, looking at the bruised young girl with soft concern and asking if she was all right. Startled by the unexpected kindness, the child softly confirmed she was fine, prompting the older girl to ask if she could understand her words. After the child nodded, her eyes drifted down to the numbered collar around the young girl's neck, asking if she was known as number 8. Hearing another gentle affirmation, she offered a warm hand in friendship, smiling as she offered to act as a protective older sister. Asked for her name, she pointed to her own collar with a soft, gentle smile, introducing herself as number 17. The echo of her past faded. Yui murmured the name 17 in her sleep, resting peacefully beside Dissy inside the traveling carriage. Inside the swaying vehicle, Valentine casually informed the group that they would soon be arriving at the second guard unit. Startled awake by the announcement, Dissy apologized profusely for falling asleep, then nervously asked Valentine if it was truly acceptable for her to go by the nickname Dissy. Reasoned that since she was not born in the slave pit, she must have a true original name from her past. He gently confessed that hearing her old birth name brought back painful memories of her lost family and destroyed village, whereas Yui had always affectionately called her Dissy. With a resolute smile, she expressed her heartfelt desire to live out her future alongside Yui carrying only the name Dissy. Moved by her resolve, Valentine patted her head approvingly, praising her admirable choice as the carriage reached its destination and the others stepped outside. Wakening fully, Yui softly greeted Dissy, only to be overwhelmed with joyful relief as Dissy wrapped her in a tight, affectionate embrace. Thankful that they were safe together. Gathering the children around the table with a basket of fresh fruit, Celeste cheerfully announced that today's lesson would focus on math. While Dissy excitedly recalled counting livestock in her home village, Yui simply admitted he had never studied arithmetic before, prompting Celeste to place 2 apples before him for a practical demonstration. Beginning the simple exercise, he noted that Yui held 1 apple while Dissy possessed the other. He then handed her apple over to Yui, prompting the teacher to ask how many the boy held now. Without hesitation, Yui answered that he had 2, earning praise from Celeste for mastering the basic concept of addition so quickly. Moving on to a slightly larger group of fruit, Celeste set down 3 apples alongside 4 oranges and asked for the combined total, to which Yui instantly responded 7. Increasing the difficulty further, Celeste added 7 apples and 6 oranges to the pile, only for Yui to calculate 13 without a moment's pause. Presenting a purely abstract word problem, Celeste asked what the sum of 7, 9, and 5 would be, and the young boy promptly supplied the correct answer of 25. Astounded by the mental math speed, Dissy gasped while Celeste admitted his genuine surprise, though Yui privately reflected on how much harder calculation used to be for him. Celeste realized the boy had developed a unique numerical system based on how slaves were counted in tens at the quarters, giving him an innate understanding of higher numbers. Overjoyed by his brilliant performance, Dissy wrapped Yui in a tight hug while Celeste offered a sweet reward for his efforts, promising another candy to Dissy if she succeeded in the next round. Celeste watched as the girl excitedly braced herself for the task. Looking gently at the piece of candy in his palm, Yui quietly determined to save it for Celeste instead, recognizing how hard their guardian worked every single day. Moving to subtraction, Sus crafted a story problem about 15 total apples where 2 were given to Yui, Dissy, and 4 to Celeste, asking how many remained. Dissy proudly threw her hand up and shouted the correct answer of 9. We calmly confirmed the result beside her. She beamed with delight upon being praised for getting the answer right, clutching her reward tightly, while her young companion softly chuckled and chose to save his sweet for later so it would not disappear too fast. Basic subtraction mastered by both children, Celeste held up pairs of fruit to introduce their next lesson, multiplication. Arranged the fruit into distinct sets of 2 on the table, step by step demonstrating how combining identical groups yields a total count. After the girl cheerfully blurted out the correct answer of 4, the boy quietly recognized the fundamental idea of times tables from a past he could barely explain. His distant memories as a frail child in a hospital bed, his loving parents had once taught him addition, subtraction, and multiplication using small treats. Turning his focus to the present study room, Celeste presented a harder prompt. 6 groups of 6, inviting the girl to write down her work if needed. Noticing the boy's calm demeanor while the girl pondered, Celeste gently asked if he already knew the answer. Leaning in close, the child leaned toward his tutor's ear and whispered the correct mental math without a moment of hesitation. Intrigued, Celeste posed additional rapid questions, 5 groups of 8, then 9 groups of 4, only for the child to answer 40 and 36 instantly. And pushed further with 12 groups of 5, the young boy promptly declared 60, leaving his instructor utterly stunned. Taken aback by such effortless mental calculation, Celeste directly asked the child how he was capable of solving these problems so fast. The girl continued scribbling at her desk. A thoughtful quiet fell over the study room while Celeste pondered the child's unusual skill. Handing the boy paper and a pencil, Celeste invited him to write down whatever methods he was using. Tutor watched in utter amazement as the child swiftly drew a complete multiplication chart grid from memory. Lifting the finished sheet, Celeste asked in shock whether he had memorized the entire chart, leaving both himself and the young girl completely speechless. Grabbed Yui's shoulders with overwhelming excitement, loudly praising the young boy as an absolute genius for his incredible demonstration of mental math. Young boy blinked in quiet shock, utterly taken aback by such an enthusiastic reaction. Eagerly asking to keep the written grid, the noble explained how invaluable it would be for teaching multiplication to the newly arrived children, while 17 piped up asking for a copy as well. Ruffling Yui's soft hair affectionately, he declared that even most adults could not perform calculations like this, reiterating what a true prodigy the boy was. Reflecting on his past life where children learned basic arithmetic at a young age, Yui inquired whether there were any dedicated places to study in Grand Tuelle. Pondering the question carefully, the high elf explained that people typically only learned when compelled by work, noble families employed private tutors, and orphanages offered basic lessons if available. Contemplating how most families required every member to work just to survive, Yui silently wished that everyone had the opportunity to learn basic reading, writing, and mathematics. Looking around at his companions, he acknowledged that had he remained in a simple village setting, he likely never would have received any education at all. Calling the immense luxury of his present circumstances, he pictured Valentine offering him fine clothing each day. Gazing down at his attire, he realized how remarkably fortunate he was to enjoy a spacious room, clean garments, freedom from manual labor, and the rare privilege to study. Memories of his former life resurfaced, bringing back the sorrow of passing away from heavy medical expenses before ever having the chance to work and repay his parents. Making his solemn reverie, Celeste praised his flawless accuracy in division, noting that his mathematical skills surpassed even his quick reading ability. 17 eagerly expressed her wish that they could recruit Yui to work in the 2nd Guard Unit's office, prompting Yui to repeat the phrase with curious intrigue. The concept of fulfilling work resonated deeply within his eyes as he considered the prospect. Determined to make a meaningful contribution, Yui announced with firm resolve that he would happily take on office work. His enthusiastic declaration was met with warm laughter from Celeste, who found the idea wonderful. Gently patting the boy's head, the Lord pointed out that performing clerical duties would also require him to get comfortable with reading and writing. Celeste gently stroked his head. Yui looked down thoughtfully, realizing that despite the extra learning required, he truly meant what he said. Sitting tall, the boy silently realized he had finally discovered a job he was capable of doing. Though it was only a small step forward, it felt like a truly meaningful. Finishing his medical checkup, Celeste informed the Beaskin warrior that he was completely healed, though he gently advised him not to push himself too hard in training. As he stepped through the corridor toward the commotion in the hall, he called out softly for the young girl. Approaching the crowded room where everyone had gathered around her table, he looked on in surprise as she sat clutching a sheet of paper. Onlookers happily parted ways to let him through, thanking him for his hard work while clearing a path for the child to share her progress. Curious about the commotion, he asked what had transpired, prompting Valentine to urge him to take a look at what she had created. Drawn upon the parchment was a neatly structured multiplication grid. Examining the grid, he realized she had independently invented a multiplication chart, enabling anyone to find calculations easily without complex mental math. Astonished by her brilliance, He praised her intelligence, marveling at how quickly she had grasped and transformed the concepts taught to her that day. He looked at her with profound pride while the others watched the heartwarming moment unfold. Gently placing his hand atop her head, he assured her that such extraordinary talent was a rare gift unique to her. Overwhelmed by his praise, she struggled to find the words to voice her sudden resolve. Waited attentively with a serene smile as she nervously built up the courage to speak. Tears of determination brimming in her eyes, she declared that when she grew up, she wanted to become an office worker. Calling how he had previously offered her an administrative role in the guard unit, he smiled as she earnestly pledged to work hard alongside him. She clutched the paper tightly against her chest, her voice trembling as she expressed her earnest wish to stay by his side and work together in the future. Overwhelmed with tenderness, Celeste wrapped his arms around the child, pulling her into a warm, reassuring embrace right before everyone present. Holding her, he reflected on how small she still was, a child so recently liberated from the chains of slavery, yet already choosing her own path and striding forward into tomorrow. The gentle, welcoming smile, he assured her that he would be delighted to work alongside her, promising they would eat lunch and walk home together once their duties were done. Tears welled in her eyes as she softly thanked Lord Celeste for his constant kindness and dedicated efforts. Nearby, Dissy handed over a small sweet candy, explaining that while it was meant as a reward for studying, Yui had specifically insisted that Celeste should have it instead. Accepting the gesture with heartfelt thanks, he observed that Yui's genuine kindness was truly one of her greatest talents. Standing at a short distance, Dissy silently observed the heartwarming exchange unfolding in the center of the hall. Her mind drifted back 2 years, recalling the time when the little girl knew almost no words beyond a simple yes. Born in a wretched gambling den covered in bruises and devoid of expression, the young girl had suffered a plight even harsher than her own. And it was precisely because of Yui's presence that she had found the strength to endure those dark days, striving to be a protective elder sister. Having escaped that living hell together, she realized that Yui had not only discovered her extraordinary gifts, but had also found the ideal counterpart to guide her. She knew in her heart that Celeste was the one truly special person with whom Yui could build a bright and happy future. Gentle, contented smile crossed her face, knowing that Yui's happiness brought her peace, while wondering if she too might find someone special one day. Contemplation was cheerfully interrupted as Valentine tossed another candy into her hands, warmly commending her for her hard work that day. She beamed with pure excitement, giggling quietly as she wondered what wonderful new things they would study together tomorrow. Companion warmly suggested teaching practical general knowledge, such as handling money for future independence, sparking enthusiasm about going on a shopping trip together someday. Clasping hands tightly, she reaffirmed her resolve to learn as much as possible, determined to be a dependable older sister who could always lead the way forward. Her quietest moments, she harbored a deep wish to someday reunite with a cherished person from her past, even as the daily routine of returning home to a busy household continued. Inside the estate, a maid hastily smoothed out a delicate dress, welcoming the young girl home as she stepped into the dressing quarters. Excusing herself after hanging up the attire, the servant left the room, shutting the heavy door behind her and leaving the child alone in the quiet space. Standing at the threshold of the dimly lit walk-in closet, a subtle growing sense of unease washed over the young girl as she peered into the quiet shadows. Standing in her newly appointed room, Yui reflected on her strange predicament. She had once been a mere slave warrior, but the dragon who rescued her now claimed she was his fated mate, leaving her lost in a haze of doubt and conviction. Determined to inspect her surroundings, she began searching through the storage boxes, opening each lid carefully to check their contents. Inside the boxes, neatly folded garments lay untouched, revealing nothing strange or out of the ordinary. He recalled sitting beside Celeste as he held an open book, gently questioning why she wished to work so hard when her dream of joining the guard staff was already within reach. Sheer extravagance of her current life weighed heavily on her mind. The new room, the plush bed, and the fine carpet felt like an overwhelming cost. He had voiced her hesitation to him, expressing gratitude for his warmth but insisting she could not simply accept such lavish care. Celeste had gently reassured her, explaining that government support covered her expenses, leaving any earnings for her to spend freely, as the room had been prepared out of his own desire while the choice of attire remained entirely hers. It then pointed out that her outfit was missing its matching ribbon, prompting her to look down in confusion, uncertain of where it could have gone. Turning to the present, Celeste stepped into her room and suggested that the missing ribbon might have been placed on a high shelf, offering to search for it together. Together, they approached the neatly made bed, scanning the quiet room for any sign of the missing item. Yui immediately leaned forward, lifting the edge of the heavy blanket to check underneath the bed structure. Standing up after her quick search, she confirmed that the space beneath the bed was completely clear. Celeste praised her responsible nature upon learning she had made her own bed, noting to himself how he refrained from entering her private sanctuary outside of necessary morning routines. While she turned to address him, his gaze caught on a stray specks of dust along the wooden surface, prompting a moment of silence. Dismissing the minor detail with a polite smile, he smoothly redirected her attention, offering to inspect the wardrobe next. Continued searching the high shelves of the room, pulling out a small container hidden in the top corner. Meanwhile, the little girl carefully unpacked her own small box of belongings nearby. Noticing that the small box had been tucked away in a place far beyond her reach, he gently requested that she remain in her room for a short while so he could investigate further. Carrying the box over to a nearby desk, he prepared to open it in private. Inside lay the missing items, safely tucked away beneath the soft cloth lining. He leaned over the open vanity, inspecting the collection of missing ornaments and trinkets spread out before him. Inhaling deeply, he caught a distinct scent lingering over the items, since immediately linking it to Adelaide. Thoughts turned to the maid's lineage, reflecting on how her mother Celine and extended family had served his house for generations, while Adelaide herself had only been employed for 2 years. Contemplating the delicate situation, he pondered whether he should handle the matter quietly without involving the young child. The young girl sat quietly, her expression soft and melancholic as she waited for him to speak. Turning back to her, he gently voiced his conclusion that Adelaide had been taking her small personal belongings. She admitted that she had noticed Adelaide trying on her clothes in front of the mirror and that her outfit was missing that morning, though she initially assumed she had simply made a mistake. Apologizing for not speaking up sooner despite feeling uneasy, she was immediately comforted by his reassuring words, telling her that she was not at fault. Deciding that Celine needed to be informed immediately, they brought the head maid into the loop, leaving her shocked and deeply distraught over her daughter's actions. Celine collapsed to her knees in shame, recalling how Adelaide had been slacking on her chores and showing off a coral flower hair ornament she claimed to have saved up for. Understanding the difficulty of the task, he gently instructed Celine to quietly search her daughter's personal belongings without drawing attention. As he listened in silence, Celine's resolve hardened. She insisted that if her daughter had truly committed theft, she could not turn a blind eye as a mother, promising to search Adelaide's room that very night. Noticing the head maid's distress, Yui gently asked if she was all right. Celine paused by her tea cart, fighting back tears as she offered a heart-wrenching apology on behalf of her daughter. Seated in quiet contemplation, Lord Celeste reflected on his long life, admitting to himself how difficult it remained to find the right answers in such painful moments. Seeing Yui's dark, tea-colored eyes, he couldn't help but think how beautiful the stolen coral hairpin would have looked on her. Reaching out to gently touch the young girl's cheek, he softly asked if she wished to reclaim what had been taken from her. Yui looked down, her voice trembling as she confessed her desire to have it back, explaining that it was the very first gift anyone had ever bought for her. Leaning in closer, she timidly asked if it would be acceptable if the item were simply returned to her without making a scene. Though she recognized Adelaide's wrongdoing, the gentle child voiced her deeper worry. She could not bear the thought of causing pain to Lord Celeste or Celine. As he held her close, Lord Celeste realized his feelings for her had grown beyond simple affection. Her sheer honesty and profound kindness deeply touched his heart. Though Yui wished to keep the secret to protect others and treasure her gift dearly, Lord Celeste gently insisted that the matter must be settled properly and justly. Meanwhile, as night fell, Celine slipped quietly into her daughter's quarters. Searching through the dark room, Celine opened drawers and cabinets, desperately hoping that the suspicion was merely a tragic misunderstanding. Her heart sank with a sharp gasp as she pulled open a hidden box, discovering the missing coral hair ornament tucked away among Adelaide's secret keepsake. Lord Celeste requested Adelaide's presence in the first-floor living room for an urgent discussion. Confused, she acquiesced, wondering what could require her personal attendance alongside her mother. Peering into the room, she pondered why Celeste usually conducted business directly with Celine rather than involving her. Entering the grand reception chamber, she observed Celeste standing before Yui, with her mother already present and waiting. She called out softly to her mother, sensing an unusual silence hanging heavily in the atmosphere. Celeste motioned for both women to take a seat across from him and Yui so they could address the matter at hand. They sat down. Adelaide inwardly noted with unease that Celeste had not even paused to change out of his guard-corps coat. Addressing her directly, Celeste asked if Adelaide had something she wished to confess to him. He stammered in confusion, but Celeste gently expressed his disappointment, noting he had hoped she would come forward voluntarily. The cold, piercing gaze, he declared that the situation left him no choice, frightening Yui with the intensity of his composure. Accused Adelaide directly of stealing from Yui, prompting a gasp of horror from her mother as Yui looked on in shock. Celeste questioned why she would commit such an act, pointing out that accessories like hair ribbons were easily affordable on her wages. Sternly announced that while criminal prosecution might be spared, she would inevitably be dismissed from her position, driving her mother to tears. Celine grabbed her daughter in despair, demanding she acknowledge the severity of her crime, while Adelaide crumbled internally with bitter envy. Unable to contain her rage, Adelaide burst into tears and pointed accusingly at Yui, demanding to know why a mere child deserved such devotion. He wept bitterly over her long-standing love for Celeste, unable to comprehend how an unsociable, quiet child could be chosen as his mate. He continued to cry out in anguish, consumed by envy over the fine clothes and ornaments gifted to the child simply because of her status as his mate. Heavy silence settled over the room as everyone present stood motionless under the weight of her dramatic outburst. The young girl quietly admitted to herself that she too failed to understand why she was chosen, resting her head in deep confusion. Reflecting on her past as a sickly child rejected by her own parents, she marveled at how someone so kind, powerful, and beautiful could treat her with such gentleness. She looked up at him, her mind filled with lingering doubts about why she deserved his unwavering devotion. Offered her a serene, tender smile, silently reaffirming his affection without needing a single word. Turning to the sobbing maid, he plainly rejected her feelings, stating that he had already found someone far more precious than anyone else. Maid lashed out in despair, claiming his affection was merely dragonkin instinct rather than true love. But he cold-heartedly asserted that he would never forgive anyone who harbored malice toward his cherished one. Head maid stepped forward and reprimanded her subordinate, pointing out the child's forgiveness and demanding a full apology, but the distraught woman stubbornly refused. The head maid dragged her away for her outrageous insolence in front of their master. The young child suddenly noticed a subtle shift in the room's energy. Despite the warmth of the hand holding hers, a terrifying, bone-chilling aura began to fill the atmosphere around them. His expression hardened into a piercing, deadly glare, revealing the true depth of his lethal fury toward those who threatened what was his. Folded in a gentle embrace, the child sensed a profound change in the atmosphere. The aura radiating from the noble holding them was completely unrecognizable, filled with an unprecedented intensity. It was not the first time Celeste had displayed fury. When attacked by his master previously, an uncontrollable surge of murderous intent had flared like fire. The child knew that terrifying feeling intimately, recalling how that same wild rage had taken hold of them when their sister was used as a shield. This quiet anger was entirely different. It did not stem from mere predatory instinct, but bled directly from the depths of his heart. A cold, solemn fury that defied understanding. Even with a high tolerance for hostility, the child could feel the air crackling with pressure. Because the intent was not directed at them, they felt no fear, but knew that anyone without combat experience would be utterly immobilized by the crushing atmosphere. Fixing his gaze downward, Celeste stated calmly that if she had simply admitted her wrongdoing and shown remorse, there might have been leniency, but it was clear she had no intention of doing so. Without a hint of hesitation, he ordered Celine to hand Adelaide over to the guard corps, prompting a quick affirmation from the head maid as the young woman collapsed in sheer panic. Desperate, the mother cried out in shock at the mention of the guard corps, while Adelaide frantically pleaded, asking her mother if this was all a lie. Young maid babbled frantically, insisting she had only borrowed the item for a short time and promised to return it immediately. But Celeste turned his cold shoulder toward her excuses, revealed the full extent of her crime, stating it was not merely theft but that she had allowed a beastman slaver into the house, a revelation that left the mother frozen in absolute horror as she recalled the shadowy intruder. Added that the captured man had confessed earlier that day, sending a shockwave of despair through Adelaide and leaving the young boy watching silently. Overwhelmed by guilt, the maid broke down into tears, stammering that she never intended for violence or anything horrible to happen, foolishly believing the girl would simply be taken away somewhere. Sobbing uncontrollably, she begged Celeste to believe her, and for a fleeting moment he looked down and softly acknowledged her words. Explained that to her, it might have seemed like a small feeling, but to him someone precious had been hurt by a person he trusted. His voice heavy with quiet grief, he recalled how Celine had wanted to believe in her until the very last moment, clinging to the hope that the child she raised would never steal, concluding that she had betrayed both him and her own mother. Celine bowed her head in deep shame, offering no excuses and accepting whatever punishment was deemed necessary, while Celeste turned to leave, entrusting Yui's ongoing care to the head maid now that Adelaide was gone. Stood firmly as Adelaide sobbed beneath him, weeping in desperation and begging to escape her impending fate. He looked up at his official insignia, recognizing his rank as a high-ranking officer in the 2nd Guard Corps. Looking down at the kneeling maid, he formally declared that she was being taken into custody for her crimes. The cold, unyielding gaze, he ordered her to get to her feet without further complaint. Later in his study, Wilzeal approached him by the window, marveling at how sharp his hearing had been earlier that morning. Celeste sat doing paperwork. Wilzeal teased him about his official reports and past extreme actions, though Celeste maintained that letting a criminal escape was a failure of duty. Wilzeal gently inquired about his well-being, acknowledging that Adelaide was the daughter of a long-serving family retainer, but Celeste stoically noted that it could not be helped. Discussion shifted to Yui's reaction, with Wilzeal explaining that aiding kidnapping would be the primary charge, while noting how concerned Yui was for Celine. Recalled Celine's selfless desire to keep Adelaide's deeds hidden, wanting only to prevent further grief for the household. Wilzeal asked why he had chosen not to overlook the matter as Celine wished, pressing him on how Yui would have perceived such leniency. Reflected on his quiet fear that turning a blind eye would cause Yui to believe there was no point in opening up to him in times of distress. Beyond her bond as his mate, he deeply valued her honest, straightforward heart, terrified of the thought that she might stop trusting or relying on him. Lowering his head into his hand, he quietly confessed that losing her trust was something he simply could not endure. Lightening the heavy atmosphere, Wilzeal teased that being adored by housemaids was troublesome, playfully blaming Celeste's polite smiles for giving people the wrong idea. Celeste offered no response to the banter, remaining silent with a contemplative look in his eyes. Reflected quietly on his choices, resolving to exercise much greater caution from that point forward as he looked toward the sunlit window. As the fireplace crackles softly in the peaceful silence of the early morning, warmth gradually fills the cozy bedchamber where a young child stirs from sleep. Gentle footsteps approach the bedside as Celeste kneels down, softly asking if his presence woke her and encouraging her to rest a little longer until the fire thoroughly warms the room. Around 6 in the morning, before the city's clock tower bell even resounds, Celeste is already impeccably dressed and prepared for the day ahead, entering to greet the young girl warmly. After getting dressed in a fresh outfit, she notices how remarkably soft her skin has become, reflecting gratefully on the soothing lotion provided for her care. He offers a gentle compliment, remarking that the outfit suits her as delightfully as an early spring flower, bringing a shy, bashful blush to her cheeks as she softly thanks him. Observing her fluffy hair, he kindly offers to braid it it neatly to match her dress, carefully styling each lock while she sits quietly under his attentive care. Holding a plush teddy bear, she peers curiously at its soothing blue tone, wondering aloud why it stands out amidst the room's warm yellow and green surroundings. The serene gaze, he explains that he acquired the soft toy specifically to welcome her home and help her feel comfortable in her new environment. Deeply touched by the thoughtful gesture, she hugs the cuddly toy tightly against her chest, marveling at how endearing it is. The dining hall, Celine sets out a nutritious breakfast prepared earlier, greeting the household with a warm maternal smile as Celeste heats up the warm dishes. After completing her domestic duties, Celine prepares to depart for volunteer work at the local church, while young Adelaide begins her mandatory 6-month stay at a rehabilitation facility under guard supervision. It comes time to travel toward the 2nd Guard Division's quarters. The child quietly voices her willingness to sit by herself, feeling slightly crestfallen. However, he insists on holding her warmly on his lap, lavishing her with affection until she smilingly accepts that she can never win against his gentle pampering. Meanwhile, the esteemed High Elf Valentine, a distinguished figure over 700 years old who departed her village in her youth, stands out for her rare warmth and affection toward all races in the city. He had dedicated the morning to instructing Yui, maintaining a strict regiment during study hours. He explained how Dragonkin and Beastkin instinctively recognize their fated partners, noting that even Wilzeal found it difficult to argue against his own wife when such instincts were involved. Reflecting on his own experiences, the elf admitted that while elves and dwarves could distinguish their partners to an extent, it lacked the intense physical pull felt by Dragonkin or Beastkin, which left him feeling drawn in by an almost indescribable sense of fate. Meanwhile, humans remained completely unable to recognize partner bonds naturally, leaving Yui to listen quietly as she digested the lesson. Continuing the lecture, the instructor warned her that Dragonkin are particularly sensitive to scent, advising her to avoid physical contact or receiving items from the opposite sex. He emphasized that being near their chosen partner stabilizes Dragonkin mentally and enhances their capabilities significantly. However, establishing an official partnership required a specific and solemn ritual involving a reverse scale. A Dragonkin's neck rests 2 specific scales known as reverse scales. By accepting one of these, the partner establishes a true soul bond, rendering any declaration of partnership unvalidated without this physical exchange. Traditional way to accept such a scale was to consume it, a sacred concept that Yui found completely astonishing as she contemplated the next scales. As lunchtime arrived, the morning lessons concluded, and the group discussed their plans for the afternoon, excited to head out toward the training grounds. Upon arriving at the training area later that afternoon, Yui enthusiastically greeted Mr. Charles, ready to move her body around. Whirling in her skirt, she explained that she had come simply to watch, prompting the kind lizardman demon to smile at her adorable appearance. As Charles looked on, the long history of conflict came to mind, recalling how humans had fought not only demons but also one another across countless wars. These battles had severely diminished the population of long-lived races like the Dragonkin, making their descendants rare compared to the prolific Beastkin. As lifespan varied wildly among demon races, Charles, a lizard man over 300 years old, was actually older than Lord Celeste. His long life and natural affinity for children explained why he adored Yui so deeply. Sitting quietly by the edge of the grounds, Yui observed the diverse guard members gathered around. He noticed a canine guard member happily retrieving a thrown item, marveling at how even his hands resembled those of a dog. Knowing she was the Dragonkin's partner, most men in the guard kept their distance, leaving Charles as one of the few who felt comfortable approaching her with a casual greeting. Approaching with a polite greeting, the young girl met Wilzeal, who wondered why she was not sparring today. She explained that wearing a skirt made sparring difficult without drawing unwanted attention. Looking down at her crude sketches, he realized she was attempting to document the different races, chuckling slightly at her unique artistic rendition. Tease her about her lacking drawing skills, but she defended her work, stating that as long as she could understand it herself, it served its purpose. Changing the subject, he crouched down to her eye level and inquired how things were progressing with Seth, asking if she believed they could truly get along as partners. She lowered her gaze, admitting softly that she simply did not know. Reassuring her, he noted that since she was still a child, Seth would never lay a hand on her, and that nothing would change between them until her own feelings became clear. He urged her to reach a decision by the time she reached 16, while she inwardly reflected on how safe she felt around Seth, precisely because he treated her without any impure motives. Reminded her that Dragonkin lived long lives, and although Seth possessed great patience, enduring such a long wait was still no easy task. She pondered her own past, recalling how surviving had consumed all her energy, leaving no room to understand romantic love or the stories written in romance novels. As Wilzeal bade her farewell, she wondered if Seth would respect her feelings if she were to fall in love with someone else in the future, left alone with her thoughts as his figure receded. As the workday concluded, Lord Celeste praised the young boy for his diligent efforts. A coworker had just invited Celeste out for drinks, prompting him to ask if Yui would like to join them for a meal, noting that the child had never experienced dining out before. Hearing the idea, the others chimed in with enthusiasm, though it was noted that Dissy would have to wait until she reached 16 to partake in alcohol. After a brief pause, Yui gave a soft nod and expressed his desire to go. The destination decided as their usual tavern, the group gathered their belongings and made plans to meet up shortly. Evening streets buzzed with life, filled with lively crowds moving between illuminated storefronts and inviting taverns. Guiding the young boy through the densely packed alleyways, Celeste reached down and held his small hand firmly to keep him from getting separated in the bustle. Noticing Yui's hesitant footsteps, Celeste kindly checked if he was feeling nervous or wanted to turn back. but the boy reassured him that he was fine despite it being his first time in such a place. Together, they stepped through the entrance of the establishment. Inside, they were warmly greeted by their companions who were already seated at a long table, waving them over. Joining the group, the companions poked gentle fun at their slight delay, acknowledging that they had slowed their pace to match Yui's steps. The attendant arrived to take their orders, prompting the group to request various fruit juices, including orange, red raisin, white raisin, and palm juice for the younger ones. Sitting across from Yui, a beast-skin man wearing glasses offered a polite hand in greeting, introducing himself as Remy Landon, a healer in Celeste's third squad. He recalled their previous encounter at the gambling hall where he had performed emergency mouth-to-mouth healing on Yui, expressing gladness at finally getting a proper chance to talk. Yui bowed his head sincerely to thank the healer for saving his life, to which Remy modestly replied that he was merely doing his duty and felt overjoyed seeing the boy looking so healthy. Overhearing the exchange, Wilziel quickly piped up to remind Yui that he had also helped remove the restrictive collar, ensuring his contribution was not forgotten. Yui offered him a polite thank you in response. Wilziel accepted it with a smirking grin, leaving the young boy to wonder internally if the man was actually kind underneath his sarcastic demeanor. He sat quietly as a massive mug of juice was brought over, marveling at its sheer size. When offered a second glass for her companion, she politely accepted, though the vessel proved almost too heavy for her small hands to lift comfortably. Across the table, Celeste amusedly explained that Dragonkin were infamous for their immense appetite for alcohol, drinking with unbound enthusiasm. Surrounding patrons quickly chimed in, teasingly envying Celeste for finding a companion, while Remy observed his rare, bright smile, contemplating the unique joys adults shared. Taking a closer look at the young girl, one of the patrons assumed she was a human partner and urged Celeste to take extra care of her. Remy giggled at the warm, bustling environment, expressing how nostalgic it felt and noting how deeply devoted Celeste seemed to his companion, a sentiment he quietly affirmed. He then shared her heartfelt goal of saving money to travel and search for her missing younger brother, leaving the child to ponder the prospect of her leaving town. Embracing her warmly, Remy emphasized the importance of family, reassuring her that they would find him, even as she admitted she would miss her dearly. Later that night, aboard a quiet carriage ride home, Celeste asked if she had enjoyed the outing, to which she happily confirmed that it had been lively and fun. Leaning back against him, she wondered aloud if he was intoxicated, noticing his unusual warmth and the distinct scent of spirits lingering on him. Assured her he was fine as he mentioned their next destination, prompting her to inwardly contrast his slight drowsiness with Wilziel's impressive tolerance earlier. Past the time, he pulled out sketches of various demon races, explaining the physical differences between smaller kobolds and larger werewolves. Cautioned her never to confuse the two races, noting that werewolves took pride in their wolf lineage while kobolds felt flattered by the comparison. As he pointed out the subtle similarities between vampires and dragonkin, he remarked on her eagerness to learn, and she readily expressed her desire to know more about Dragonkin. Upon returning to their room, he invited her over to rest from the long day, softly inspecting her neck while she pondered hidden dragon traits. Lying in bed later, she reflected on the deadline she had been given and the current nature of their bond, questioning whether their relationship would ever evolve into something deeper. He leaned into his gentle touch as he stroked her hair, reassuring her that it was perfectly fine if she drifted off to sleep. He then suggested it was time for them to head back to the bedroom. Softly offering a gentle goodnight, he looked down at her with warmth, to which she warmly returned the tender bedtime greeting. He recalled her past life as a slave, when no one had ever spoken such kind words to her, and how she and Dissy would simply collapse from sheer exhaustion every night, much like her former self used to do. Tears welled in her eyes as she realized how extraordinarily precious it was to finally have someone to whom she could wish a peaceful night. Looking over at him sitting contentedly in his chair. Settling into bed with her stuffed bear, she could not help but wonder when he ever found the time to sleep or bathe, given how tirelessly he watched over her. Reflecting on a tragic past, memories resurface of a lifetime spent in a hospital bed from the moment of birth. Plagued by a serious illness, those early years were defined by constant medical care, made possible only through the relentless hard work and loving devotion of devoted parents who visited every single day. A fragile life reached its end at 18. Though lived as best as possible without regrets, a lingering sorrow remained. Drifting into the vast unknown, a single whisper of hope echoed into the void, a wish for another chance at life. Now seated quietly in a sunlit room, Yui clutched a small book, longing to love and be loved once more, determined to truly live this second chance with a healthy body. Interrupting those quiet thoughts, Celeste knocked gently and stepped inside, warmly inviting Yui to join him for lunch. Following Celeste into the grand hallway, Yui noticed the household staff, including Celine, exchanging curious glances as they gathered near the dining hall. Pausing just outside the heavy double doors, Yui felt a surge of gentle anticipation before pushing them open. Inside, the room burst with warmth as friends called out her name, cheerfully wishing her a happy birthday. Overwhelmed by the sudden celebration, Yui listened as Celeste explained that he had invited 2 special guests to celebrate her 13th birthday. Wilziel knelt before her with a gentle smile, adding his heartfelt wishes to the occasion. Surprised by the news of her own birth date, Yui looked towards Celeste, who gently revealed that crude records recovered from the gambling den had allowed them to determine this special day. Those dark documents detailed how 13 years prior, a child was born between slaves 52 and 36, inheriting the vacant designation of number 8. The harsh pages recorded only battles, victories, and losses. Yet from those grim traces, her true origin was reclaimed. Setting aside those painful memories, Celine proudly presented a grand cake baked with utmost care and devotion, bringing a bright spark of wonder to Yui's eyes. Looking at the magnificent cake, Yui recalled past lives, remembering how dragons and elves celebrated birthdays only once every few decades, and recalling quiet moments in her former life when she secretly ate small pieces of cake in a silent hospital room. Surrounded by loving faces and genuine warmth, Yui realized that this moment was real. It was no longer a cold hospital, nor a fight for survival, but a quiet, joyful birthday with people who truly cared. Tears of deep joy welled in her eyes as she looked up at everyone, and spoke from the very depths of her heart, offering her sincere thanks. She looks up in quiet surprise as gentle hands wipe the tears from her cheeks, leaving her feeling deeply cared for. Celeste warmly notes that while dessert usually arrives after the meal, today calls for a special exception as a grand cake is presented. Taking a careful bite, she pauses, savoring the rich, sweet flavor unfolding on her palate. Seeing her expression, the others lean in eagerly to ask if the treat meets her approval. Round the table, everyone joyously dives into the feast, complimenting the delicious spread laid out before them. Celine reveals that Celeste worked tirelessly to prepare every dish himself, though Wilziel dryly points out it would have been a disaster without her guidance. The feast continues with delighted praise from the young guests. The mood remains bright and festive. The soft smile, she offers her heartfelt thanks to Celeste for making such a wonderful meal just for her. Celebration moves forward as Celeste steps up to present the very first birthday gift. Hands over a comprehensive species encyclopedia, having carefully selected a book about topics she had shown interest in. Clasping the book tightly to her chest, she resolves to read and study every single page with immense gratitude. Next, the energetic young girl hands over her present, explaining that she chose a flower resembling Yui's eye color with her allowance. Deeply touched by the thoughtful gesture, Yui promises to treasure the lovely gift forever. Then a sturdy wooden sirban is presented as the final gift of the gathering. Recognizing the familiar counting tool, Yui ponders if they are already preparing her to work in the mansion's clerical office. She wondered if she was rushing things by asking to become a clerk, but knowing she would need the skill, she earnestly asked them to teach her how to use the abacus. Looking down at the spread of presents, the cake, and the delicious food, tears of gratitude filled her eyes as she softly thanked everyone. Across the room, Adele, Celine, and Valentine watched her with gentle, encouraging smiles, deeply touched by her earnest enthusiasm. Looking upon their kindness, she reflected on how she had always been on the receiving end, unable to offer anything in return. Yet seeing Wilziel's warm expression, she realized that even if her past self was gone, she was surrounded by people who truly cared for her now, inspiring her to do her absolute best with what she could accomplish. Clutching the abacus, the book, and the delicate embroidered handkerchief tightly against her chest, her face radiated pure happiness as she recognized just how many cherished treasures she now possessed. Among those priceless gifts was a precious memory from her past, the joyous, smiling face of her beloved big sis holding a birthday cake. Just Celeste informed Yui that today they would be testing her magical power, presenting a specialized identification diagram. Surprised by the announcement, she listened as he revealed that, despite being human, she actually possessed a remarkable amount of magic power. Eagerly asking if this meant she could cast spells, she was told that the upcoming test would determine her true affinity. He displayed the aptitude chart, explaining that having raw magic power alone was not enough, as elemental affinity was determined entirely from birth. To begin the test, he asked her to prick her finger and place a single drop of blood in the center of the magic circle, reassuring her that he would instantly heal the cut. Without hesitation, she pricked her fingertip and let the crimson droplet fall onto the center of the paper. In response to her blood, a brilliant surge of radiant energy burst forth from the diagram, engulfing the room in light. Intricate magical glyphs and concentric circles expanded around them, illuminating the surrounding study with a glowing display. The light settled, he confirmed his initial assessment. While her magic reserves were immense, she possessed zero elemental aptitude. Pointed out that typically even those with poor aptitude extend toward at least one element on the chart, yet her magic remained completely centered without leaning anywhere. Noted how exceptionally rare her condition was, revealing that her magic was entirely attributeless and pure. She questioned if that was a good thing. He explained that while the purity of her magic was remarkable, it meant she was unable to cast traditional elemental magic. Reassured her that such power was far from useless, as high reserves naturally enhanced physical durability and accelerated self-healing, a trait that had previously helped her survive during her time in captivity. Curious about his abilities, she asked about his magic, leading to a lighthearted moment as they recalled how he playfully used his water magic for everyday tasks like baking. Explained that due to the long lifespans and vast experience of dragonkin, advanced practitioners could manipulate elements outside their primary specialty or even bypass chance entirely. Watched as Adelaide burst into the room with boundless energy, calling out Yui's name and enthusiastically announcing her news. With a bright smile, she declared to everyone present that she had been assigned to serve as the new receptionist for the 2nd Guard Division. Surprised by the sudden update, the young girl leaned in closely to double-check if she had heard correctly. Continuing with her bright enthusiasm, Adelaide shared how she had always dreamed of working alongside the Guard Division's front desk staff. Confident in her physical strength and social nature, she proudly revealed that she had been accepted as an apprentice receptionist. Meanwhile, Charles and Valentine observed the situation from the side, reflecting on her young age. While Charles noted that 14 was considered quite adult among lizardmen, Valentine sympathetically acknowledged that for a human, starting work at 14 was still remarkably early. Adelaide went on to explain her motivation, expressing her desire to earn her own income rather than relying entirely on Valentine. She chuckled lightheartedly about the lizardman's strict upbringing, determined to prove her independence. Reaching out to take her friend's hands, 17-year-old 17 offered her warmest encouragement. Inspired by the moment, Yui quietly harbored her own wish to start working soon as well. Before her thoughts could drift further, Celeste stepped forward carrying an official document. Kneeling down to eye level, he handed the paper directly to the young girl, presented the formal request document, informing her that the clerical office wished to hire her as an apprentice. Looking at her intently, he asked if she would accept the offer for her very first job. Quiet determination blooming on her face, she readily accepted the position as a clerical apprentice. Satisfied with her response, Celeste noted her acceptance, while Valentine briefly paused as if noticing something subtle. The room instantly filled with celebratory cheer as the companions congratulated both girls. Adelaide playfully reminded them of the workplace etiquette, noting that everyone would now be addressed by their formal titles during duty. Watching the bright young recruits, Valentine and Charles remarked on how quickly human children grow and mature, pleased to see new places where the younger generation could thrive. Together, they escorted Yui down the hallway toward the fourth office to officially deliver her response. Seeing her step forward with confidence, they felt a reassuring sense of pride in her growth. Inside the office, a Rabbitkin staff member named Anna Duneve warmly greeted the newcomers. She introduced herself with a gentle smile upon learning that Yui had accepted the apprenticeship. Anna explained that her official duties would begin in a few days, assuring the young girl that she would personally take full responsibility for training and guiding her. Looking around the busy office environment, Yui felt a subtle mix of anxiety and excitement as she prepared to embark on this new chapter of her life. She stood amidst the unfamiliar faces, contemplating how working independently was a step neither her past nor present self had ever taken. Yet she recognized that spending time apart from the others would soon become normal. Amidst her quiet apprehension, a comforting touch offered gentle reassurance that everything would be fine. Reminding herself that this was neither a painful medical procedure nor a brutal arena fight, she took strength in knowing it was a path she had chosen for herself, earnestly requesting her new supervisor to be strict with her. Her mentor agreed with a light chuckle, promising full rigor, while Celeste stood nearby watching her unwavering determination. Inside the bustling fourth office, administrative tasks piled high. Anna patiently instructed young Yui on her new duties, handing over a towering stack of medical ward documents. She explained the process clearly, checked the numbers carefully, recalculating to fix any errors, and marked them correctly. Anna continued her breakdown of the office's responsibilities, detailing how they oversaw purchasing supplies, inventory management, and medical ward recs across multiple floors, even pointing out Lord Celeste's domain on the upper wards. Offering a comforting smile, she encouraged the newcomer to do her best and asked her never to hesitate to request help whenever something seemed confusing. Nodding politely, the young girl accepted her task. She settled into her desk amidst the quiet hum of the busy administrative room, immediately diving into the paperwork. She carefully examined each document. She noticed how many recruits enlisted without basic literacy skills, resulting in frequent errors and hard-to-read handwriting. Her eyes suddenly paused on a specific page, captivated by an exceptionally elegant signature. Tracing the refined characters written on the parchment, she softly read the name Universe aloud, admiring the exquisite handwriting. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the hallway outside the office, Wilziel stood silently as Valentine walked past. Watched the high elf closely, observing his calm yet preoccupied demeanor with quiet interest. Noticing the subtle tension in the elf's posture, he called out casually, asking if he was worried about his mate, noting that even subtle dragonkin traits might pick up on such underlying anxiety. Noted how patient his companion remained under the circumstances. The elf confessed that simply being unable to stay by her side hurt deeply, especially while keeping watch away from her. Nearby onlookers gossiped in disbelief, amazed that a dragonkin would allow his mate to accompany another male, calling such freedom nearly unheard of. Overhearing the chatter, the young man suggested that keeping her close would be entirely understandable, assuring him that no one would blame him for being protective. High Elf offered no immediate response, looking ahead thoughtfully as they walked side by side. Reflected internally on the complex nature of dragonkin instincts, knowing how problematic some could become after finding their mate, and how Seth's mate, a former slave, lived under his protection without anyone daring to criticize. As he observed the exchange, Wilziel found himself faltering in front of Celeste, unable to complete his thought. Interrupting the quiet moment, the Lord stepped into the room to announce that he had arrived to take the young girl home. Upon his entrance, the office workers who had gathered around Yui immediately bowed and offered their respectful greetings. Anna excitedly explained that Yui had taught everyone a novel calculation method, prompting his intrigued response. Yui quietly realized that basic column math was unknown in this realm, as Anna continued to shower her with praise for her remarkable efficiency. Lifting Yui up into his arms, he proudly affirmed her talents before bidding the staff farewell for the day. As they walked together through the corridor, He tenderly asked if her workday had been taxing, to which she replied that she had given her all. Looking downward with a shy expression, she softly voiced her wish to eat something sweet. Warm, gentle smile crossed his face upon hearing her innocent desire. Reassured her that Celine had already been instructed to prepare a special cake, bringing a sparkle of excitement to her eyes as she asked about strawberries. He began picking up her pace in excitement while he gently warned her not to trip, all while Wilziel watched them from the upper balcony. Leaning over the railing, he continued to watch the pair walk away in harmony. Sight stirred deep memories within him of a time when he held that very closeness. Acknowledged that the bond he witnessed was once his own reality, knowing that resolving his current situation rested solely between him and his mate. Resting his face against his hand, he confessed a mix of envy and irritation, realizing how truly devoted the Lord was to valuing his mate's happiness. He had long carried a deep-seated loneliness within his heart, believing it to be an inescapable part of his nature, one that not even making numerous friends in Granzel could ever fully dispel. That persistent ache only softened slightly whenever he stood by Celeste's side. Knowing that a mate is a dragonkin's true counterpart, the missing piece destined to complete their heart, he stared into the distance, wondering if his own emptiness would finally vanish once he met his intended mate. Admitting to himself that he envied both Celeste and the child who walked beside him, he ruffled his hair in exasperation at his own childish feelings. Yet as he watched Celeste carefully matching his stride with the small girl down below, his gaze softened. Sincerely wishing for Celeste's bond to fully bloom, he resolved to invite them both out for drinks again the following day. Meanwhile, as they walked away together, Yui looked up at Celeste and curiously asked how long he and Wilziel had been friends. Celeste paused to reminisce, recalling that their bond had begun shortly before he turned 100 years old, back when Wilziel was still just a young boy sitting quietly on the stone step. Apologizing softly, Wilziel turned away, explaining to Celeste that he could no longer spend time playing with him. The older companions departed to focus on their work and raise their families. They suggested he find playmates among their children once they grew a bit older. Left alone in silence, he sat on the doorstep pondering why adult Dragonkin waited so long before choosing a spouse, longing for his absent parents. Moments later, Captain Gerard arrived at the residence, accompanied by a young boy, asking if the master of the house was currently at home. He introduced the boy as his son, Wilziel, who had arrived from the capital just the day before, suggesting that the two boys become friends since there were few Dragonkin children of their age in Granziel. Impressed by Wilziel's stature and unusually mature demeanor, Celeste exchanged formal greetings with his new acquaintance. Two boys stood together in the alleyway, sizing each other up in quiet reflection. Noticing a subtle presence nearby, Celeste pointed out that someone was watching them, earning a surprised compliment from Wilziel for detecting what even adult Dragonkin might miss. Observing Celeste closely, Wilziel remarked on how remarkably quiet he was despite his Dragonkin heritage. In the central square near the fountain, a commotion suddenly erupted among the young children. Fiery young child stood proudly over a group of defeated troublemakers, stepping up boldly to protect a tearful little girl. Turning to Celeste, the young hero loudly vented about the local delinquents who kept causing trouble in groups. Child explained that despite efforts to stop them, the troublemakers always hid whenever bad things occurred. Offering his hand in support, Celeste resolved to join in and help straighten out the delinquents together. Watched as the energetic boy enthusiastically formed a kids' patrol squad, leveraging his father's position as a guard. Guided by a few simple principles: no discrimination, no bullying, and protecting the younger children, the initiative quickly took root among the local youth. Because of this leadership, the patrol squad rapidly expanded across the town's children. His formidable strength and charismatic personality naturally drew others to his side, turning them into loyal followers. As time passed, the boisterous youth frequently challenged him to magic battles, eager to test his growing abilities. Observing how much taller his rival had grown, he calmly agreed to a sparring match, though the other insisted it was a full-fledged battle. Though his friend possessed raw physical power and overwhelming magical capacity that far exceeded normal limits, his lack of strategic thinking kept them on equal footing. Their constant duels inevitably resulted in an even 50-50 split. Despite his own reputation as distant and aloof, which often led local troublemakers to pick fights with him, he never harbored any resentment toward his spirited companion. Later, when reports of a magical beast approaching the town surfaced, the squad lay in ambush among the forest brush. Impatient to act rather than wait for the official guard unit, his bold friend urged everyone to tackle the threat themselves. Suddenly, a monstrous horned boar burst through the thicket with a deafening roar, charging recklessly toward them as the group declared their intent to bring it down. Confrontation erupted into a violent clash of magical energy as they unleashed their attacks against the monstrous creature, sending intense shockwaves through the forest clearing. Reacting instantly to the danger, he deployed defensive magic to shield the others, calling out in deep concern for his friend who was absorbing the brunt of the beast's fierce assault. Moments after the chaotic clash subsided, he rushed through the trees to find his companion collapsed on the rocky ground, groaning in pain from a severe wound. Even while lying injured, his friend attempted to check on the state of the battle, but he firmly commanded him not to move, reassuring him that the rest of the squad was taking care of the creature. Confronting such a severe injury for the very first time, he remained composed and focused his energy, promising to heal his wounded comrade immediately. Soothing magical glow emanated from his hands as he carefully applied restorative magic directly over the injury, steadily easing the agony. Relieved by the gentle magic, the injured boy offered a grateful smile, calling him affectionately by his nickname and offering his heartfelt thanks. Looking down with a warm, gentle smile of his own, he affectionately called his friend by name and softly reassured him that it was no problem at all. Reflected on how repeatedly healing his his reckless friend had accelerated his own magical mastery, revealing a natural talent for restorative spells. As the years passed and they came of age, he announced his intention to enlist in the 2nd Guard Unit, prompting Wilzeal to eagerly join him on the same path. Together they laid their fallen companion, the loyal feline beast, to rest surrounded by white flowers, honoring the bond they shared in their youth. Standing shoulder to shoulder in their guard uniforms, Wilzeal offered a quiet, respectful moment of silence alongside him, noted that the town's patrol squad they founded continued to operate even after their graduation, giving his parents peace of mind as they set out on a journey with his twin brothers. Even now, distance could not sever their bonds. Regular letters kept him connected to his beloved family and close companions. Far across the realm under an open sky, a young warrior trained tirelessly under the vast horizon. Pausing his sword drills, Sylvan called out to his twin brother Ivan, who had just arrived with a newly delivered letter from their older brother. Reading the missive together, the twin elf brothers chuckled over how dramatically their older brother had changed, constantly writing home with a newfound warmth and frequent smiles. They excitedly pondered meeting his human mate, eager to welcome her as their new sister-in-law while discussing their upcoming expedition. Yet a quiet somberness touched their thoughts as they acknowledged the vast difference in lifespans, knowing they would outlive their brother long before his time came. Overlooking the magnificent sprawling capital, they recalled an order from the Dragon King summoning the Highness's presence, signaling a storm brewing on the horizon. Upon returning home, Celeste was greeted with a letter addressed directly to him. As he unfolded the message, he turned to Yui and called out his name, preparing to share the news. Curious, the children asked about his younger brothers. Celeste explained that his twin brothers had successfully become royal knights in the capital, elaborated on Gransel's location at the eastern edge of the Dragon Kingdom, a crucial transit town where envoys frequently pass and knights escort travelers between the capital and the border. Asked what his brothers were like, he noted that long-lived races like elves and dragonfolk rarely have more than 1 or 2 children in a lifetime, yet his mother miraculously gave birth to 3 boys who look remarkably alike. Mentioned that while people often refer to the twin elves in town, they usually mean his younger brothers, though he himself is often told he resembles their mother while his brothers take after their father. Meanwhile, down in the lively streets of Gransel, a grand carriage surrounded by popular royal knights made its majestic entry into town. The handsome twin elf knights rode through the cheering crowds, waving graciously at the excited townspeople calling out to them. As they navigated the streets, they pondered the security detail and looked forward to reunited with their elder brother after nearly a century. Outside the manor, the arrival of the guests was signaled as the carriage pulled up to the estate. Reuniting warmly with Seth, the twin brothers Yvonne and Sylvan expressed their joy at seeing him again after such a long time. Celeste introduced Yvonne, the older twin on the right, and Sylvan, the younger twin on the left, to Yui, pointing out their distinct features so he could tell them apart. Overjoyed to meet Yui, one of the energetic twins instantly scooped the young boy up into a suffocatingly tight, affectionate hug. Seeing Seth glaring sternly at the rough treatment, the twin quickly apologized and eased his grip on the startled boy. Seth gently reminded them that Yui is a fragile human who could easily be harmed if too much strength is applied, prompting them to promise to be extremely careful. Once settled inside the room, the twins casually turned to Seth and bluntly asked him when he planned on getting married. Gently reprimanded his younger brother, warning that careless remarks would only complicate matters, and that they should simply watch over the pair. The other twin quickly joined in scolding his brother, prompting him to defend himself by arguing he had meant no harm in asking about his partner. Calm quiet descended over the spacious room as the brothers settled back onto the couches to continue their conversation. Twins realized that the letter had only mentioned a partner without confirming an official bond, prompting their older brother to quietly reflect on his current relationship status. Affirmed that while she was indeed his partner, whether she ultimately chose to form a true bond with him was entirely her decision. The two brothers found themselves thoroughly baffled by such an open-ended stance. She was told not to worry. Hearing that her choice was left completely open, left the young girl feeling a subtle pang of loneliness. As the twin brothers casually sipped their tea, content to accept their older brother's choice, the young girl quietly wondered to herself why she felt so melancholic. The guardian clarified that for the time being, she would simply remain under his full protection until she reached adulthood. Teasing his twin about just wanting a younger sibling, the brother enthusiastically declared that to them, the young girl was basically like a little sister. Admitting that he too had always wanted a younger sister, the second twin leaned in eagerly, begging the girl to call him Big Brother while her guardian offered a soft apology for his brother's enthusiasm. Both brothers pressed their hands together in dramatic entreaty, begging her earnestly to refer to them as her older brothers. Overwhelmed by their warmth, moisture gathered in the girl's eyes as she softly uttered the words. With wide, hopeful eyes, each twin eagerly introduced himself as her big brother. Looking up at them with a sweet, tentative gaze, she gently tried out calling each of them Big Brother. The adorable response sent both twins into a frenzy of delight, clutching their heads in sheer bliss at how wonderful it was to have a little sister. Shifting the mood to serious business, they presented a sealed official letter to their older brother, explaining that it had arrived directly from His Majesty the Dragon King. Examined the official document carefully, revealing that it was an explicit summons commanding him to accompany the returning diplomatic mission back to the royal capital, and specifically instructing that Yui go with him. The sudden and unexpected order left the young child visibly anxious, stammering in disbelief at being included in the summons to the capital. Within the quiet study, Eve questioned his twin brother about whether he intended to see the king, asking if he had heard the reason behind the sudden audience. Celeste stood solemnly by the window, his gaze fixed outside as he admitted that an official summons had arrived from the sovereign. Surprised by the news, the young child looked up in wonder as Celeste explained that the official notice only detailed an assignment for guard duty. Gently placed a hand on the child's shoulder, acknowledging that with the king's direct summons having arrived, there was no choice but to depart. Looking out into the night, a rare soft expression crossed his usually stoic face. Brightening at the prospect, Yue suggested viewing the journey as a sightseeing trip alongside the night order for safety. The twin brothers smiled warmly, looking forward to traveling together with her once more. While mentioning their parents had also written wishing to visit soon, the twins watched from the window. They lightheartedly pondered their parents' vague sense of time, knowing that promises of soon from high elves often meant several years in the future. Walking together down the lit city streets, the brothers recalled how affectionate Celeste had been toward the small child, noting that even strong dragonfolk cannot resist their natural instincts to pat a child's head. Reflected on their master's demeanor, agreeing that they had never seen him wear such a genuinely happy expression before. Looking up at the starry night sky, they quietly contemplated the fleeting nature of human lives compared to their own long lifespans, resolving simply to watch over her for as long as they could. 1 week later, on the day of departure, Adele whined tearfully at the thought of not being able to see Yui for an entire month, expressing how jealous she was that she couldn't come along. Dressed warmly for the long journey, Yui reassured her companions about her granted leave from the security unit, explaining that the round trip to the royal capital would take a full month. Outside the estate, Nicol Lavender, commander of the Third Night Order, formally greeted the group alongside his knights, offering a seat in his wagon if the young child grew tired during the demanding journey. Before they could proceed, Seth interjected smoothly, inviting Yui to ride inside his personal carriage instead. Surprised by a sudden arrival, Seth questioned Wilziel on why he was present, only for Wilziel to casually reveal that his father had summoned him back to the capital after 200 years. Turning to Yui with a charming smile, Wilziel formally introduced himself as Wilgir El Arnaldi, the second prince of the Dragon Kingdom. Sylvan leaned down to whisper an apology to Yui, admitting that Will had explicitly asked them to keep his royal identity a secret until now. She stood completely stunned by the sudden revelation, her jaw nearly dropping as Wilziel playfully accused her of overreacting to his true identity. Covering her composure, she confessed that a prince was not at all what she had imagined, having always pictured someone handsome, dazzling, and refined like Seth. Wilziel immediately protested, insisting that he possessed those exact charming qualities, though she merely teased him for stealing the phrase she had held onto. Amused by her reaction, Seth chimed in to promise that once they arrived at the royal castle, he would teach her even more impressive expressions. Wilziel offered a warm, genuine smile, touched that her attitude toward him remained unchanged despite his royal status, while she casually remarked that delicious food was what truly mattered. The group began making final preparations. Wilziel voiced a quiet wish to ride horseback rather than ride inside a carriage. Leaning down toward her, Seth quietly shared that very few people knew of Wilziel's royal blood, explaining that he had moved to Grancel precisely to escape that burden. Went on to reveal that factional strife surrounding the succession was fierce, but Wilziel had simply chosen to step aside rather than compete with his older brother. Pondering his words, she reflected on how unusual it was for a prince to be protected by covert shadow agents rather than a visible guard of knights. Observing the party's final readiness, Seth announced that it was time to depart for the capital. Reached down to help her mount his horse, prompting her to think that he looked far more like a prince than Wilziel ever did. The powerful leap, the steed burst forward, carrying them out past the grand city gates. As they galloped into the dense forest, Seth held her firmly, reassuring her and telling her to hold tight against the rushing wind. Mounted procession stretched across the scenic mountain trails under the bright open sky. Gazing out over the breathtaking landscape, she realized her journey was carrying her far beyond the confines of the hospital, the gambling den, and Grancel itself. Resolved not to miss a single detail along the journey, determined to return with countlessly rich souvenir stories for Dishy. As the horse jolted, he held on tightly in fear, but Seth gently inquired if he was still frightened. Shaking his head enthusiastically, the boy gasped in awe at how remarkably fast the steed was moving. Looking up at Seth's reassuring smile, a profound confidence washed over him, realizing that so long as Seth stayed by his side, he could venture anywhere in the world. Together, the riders galloped across the expansive open plains, embarking toward their distant destination with unwavering resolve. As the journey paused, Wilziel checked on Yui after his time on horseback, knowing the ride could be tough on someone unaccustomed to it. The young boy quietly assured him that he was doing fine despite the physical strain. Kneeling on the grass, he softly cast a healing spell on his tender legs, politely declining further assistance while the rest of the party stretched and commented on how tedious long carriage rides could be. Stepping away from the resting area, he wandered under the towering canopy of ancient trees that stretched high into the sky. Gazing upward in quiet awe, the sheer volume of woodland surrounding him took his breath away. Noticing his fascination while relaxing with a book, Wilziel kindly encouraged him to explore the nearby woods, provided he stayed within a safe distance. Walking deeper into the foliage, he gently touched the rough bark and breathed in the crisp, damp fragrance of the forest after rain. As Nicol strolled nearby, she wondered aloud if the quiet surroundings felt monotonous or dull to him. Resting a hand against a trunk, he softly replied that he found the forest delightful, full of vibrant sounds and rich scents. He marveled at every novel sensation, from rustling leaves to singing birds. Wilziel quietly explained to Nickel that the boy had lived trapped underground as a slave until very recently, making this his first true encounter with nature. Knight Captain listened attentively, her eyes softening as she absorbed the full context of his past. Solemnly, she pledged to keep him safe throughout their travels. At the same time, Celeste approached the young boy with a fresh batch of snacks packed specifically for him. Celeste offered the treats around. Nickel immediately stepped forward in full duty, requesting to perform a poison check before anyone indulged. Wilziel lightly teased her overcautious nature, assuring her the treats were made by trusted hands. After sampling one, Nickel offered a warm smile, admitting they were delicious. Restoring her professional posture, she notified the group that they would resume their trek in half an hour to clear the forest before night fell. Pondering the vastness of the wilderness, the young boy wondered how far the forest stretched, prompting Celeste to offer him a view from high above the treetops. He looked up in confusion as Celeste mentioned that spreading his wings would allow him to fly for a short duration. Wilziel pointed out that since the young boy had been unconscious during most of their time at the gambling hall, he had never seen Seth's wings, noting that information about dragonfolk wings was rarely written about outside specialized books. The boy's eyes sparkled with wonder at the thought of growing wings, while Wilziel warned that flying alongside the order would surely tear his clothes. He offered a blanket to wrap himself in after shedding his tunic. The boy prepared for the brief flight during their rest break. Dripping down carefully on the grass, he set his garments aside under Wilziel's calm guidance. Moments later, Celeste unfurled a magnificent, massive pair of draconic wings, their shimmering span spreading far across the clearing. Gazing up in complete awe at the majestic sight, the boy softly murmured how beautiful he was, touching Celeste deeply with his fearlessness and acceptance. The single powerful beat of those massive wings, they launched high into the sky, soaring rapidly into the open air. As they climbed higher, he looked down at the tiny carriage below, feeling his legs sway in the wind, a little frightened yet utterly mesmerized by the feeling of floating. Vast forest stretched infinitely beneath them, a breathtaking ocean of green bounded by distant mountain peaks. Overwhelmed by the joy of seeing the royal capital in the world far beyond what his eyes had ever reached, a brilliant smile lit up his face. As Celeste carefully held him close, the boy noticed his savior's shallow breathing and realized the immense burden those massive wings and heavy tail placed upon him just for his sake. Deeply grateful, he gently asked to go back down, thanking Celeste warmly as they smoothly descended back toward the ground. Once back on the ground and fully dressed, he stood ready as the knights announced their immediate departure. Boarding the carriage once more, he watched his legs dangle, wondering nervously if the journey would be as bumpy as before. Stood trembling slightly as Celeste knelt down beside him, offering to let him ride in Will's carriage instead if he disliked the current one. Young boy clarified that he didn't hate carriages, but after only 2 hours, he felt overwhelmed thinking about how many more carriage rides lay ahead on their journey. Celeste offered warm praise for enduring his very first 2-hour ride, admitting that he too was exhausted from not riding a horse in a while, and gently invited Yui to share the carriage ride with him. Overhearing the exchange, Will chimed in from nearby, reminding them that he had suggested the flight in the first place, and cheerfully invited them both to join his carriage for some company. Enveloped in such gentle warmth, the boy leaned in closely against Celeste, comforted by his gentle gaze. Deciding to ride together, Celeste scooped the child into his arms and carried him toward the waiting carriage. Resting his face into Celeste's shoulder, the boy softly murmured that Celeste was being sly, noting that he didn't actually look tired at all. Gentle hands cradled Yui as he slowly opened his eyes, hearing his name called softly. Celeste smiled down at him, remarking on how long the journey had been and explaining that they would be setting up camp here for the night. Drowsily rubbing his eyes, the young boy wondered if he had fallen asleep, to which Celeste warmly reassured him that he must have been exhausted from the long road. Quiet realization dawned on him as he reflected on his past. Back when he was a slave, even the slightest noise would wake him instantly, yet now he had slept soundly even after the carriage stopped, making him wonder if he had grown weaker. As Will headed off to prepare the campsite, he suggested that Yui stay behind with Celeste, but Will Gear stepped forward, inviting the young boy to stay with him instead so they could talk and keep each other company. While the rest of the group tended to the campfire, Yui sat quietly on the grass. His attention was soon drawn toward a large werewolf warrior resting nearby. Curious, the massive beastkin turned his gaze upon the child and asked if he was curious about something, before introducing herself as Bridget Moroi. Having tasked Bridget with keeping the child company, Wilgear walked off to help with the camp, leaving Yui and the large wolf warrior face to face. Looking at her gentle eyes, the boy admitted that although he had met werewolves before in the guard unit, this was his very first time meeting a female werewolf, prompting Bridget to chuckle warmly and note that it was also her first time seeing a human child up close. Reaching out toward the beastkin's massive furry paw, Yui politely asked if he might touch her, while Wilgear watched on fondly at the endearing scene. Carefully, his tiny hand met the warrior's broad paw, pressing palm to palm in a quiet moment of connection. Feeling the rough texture beneath his fingertips, the boy observed that her hands were large, slightly firm, and clearly belonged to someone who fought, contrasting with his own soft, small hands. Bridget explained that werewolves fought as warriors regardless of sex, and mentioned that at 150 years old she was still considered a rookie among her kind. As he held her paw, a bitter shadow crossed the child's mind as he realized he was forgetting how to fight, no longer feeling like a true warrior. Meanwhile, back at the estate gates, two elf guards conducted their shift change, casually chatting about Seth's whereabouts and asking how life had been going living with him. Watched as Wilziel sat by the campfire with Yui, gently asking if the boy thought he would eventually grow to like Celeste. Uncertain, Yui murmured that he didn't know, admitting that he didn't truly understand what love was. Hearing this honest confession, Wilziel paused, sighing softly as he contemplated the boy's innocence. Reflecting further, Yui added that if it was simply a matter of liking or disliking someone, he knew for certain that he liked Celeste. Surprised by the straightforward answer, Wilziel suggested that if Yui liked him, he ought to smile at him more often, noting how difficult his stoic expression made him to read. Attempting to follow the advice, Yui forced an awkwardly wide, unnatural grin, prompting Wilziel to burst into laughter at the terrible result. As Wilziel continued to chuckle and asked Yui to try again, Seth approached the fireside, inquiring if something was wrong. Meanwhile, Bridget quietly noted the scent of a female werewolf nearby, while Wilziel self-consciously wondered if his own smile was really that bad, even as Yui's smiles were praised as endearing. Wilziel playfully teased Yui by mimicking the awkward grin the boy had displayed earlier. Outing, Yui accused Wilziel of being mean, but Seth interjected softly, comforting the boy by assuring him that his usual natural smile was truly lovely, even if the forced one hadn't come from the heart. Throwing his head back dramatically, Wilziel confessed that if his best friend were taken away, he naturally wouldn't be happy about it. Seth gently advised Wilziel not to apologize unless he could still fix the situation, a sentiment Wilziel quietly accepted just as a guard arrived to announce that dinner was served. Standing up to head toward the meal, Wilziel mentioned he would be eating with the twins due to his prince duties, promising to bring back food for Yui and Seth. Watching him depart to dine with the kingdom's envoys, Yui silently reflected on how demanding a prince's life seemed to be. Over the fire, a large pot of hot stew simmered, ready to nourish the travelers after a long day. She sat quietly beside Seth as he offered her dried meat, reminding her to chew carefully, while Eve and Sylvan offered to slice up fresh apples for them. Gentle care, the high noble placed a sweet piece of fruit directly into her mouth. Shortly after finishing her meal, she drifted off to sleep against him, prompting the twin brothers to whisper amongst themselves about how well-behaved she was and offering to take watch so the dragonfolk wouldn't have to leave her side. Young elf brothers reminisced about their own wild childhood travels, remembering how they used to run around endlessly day and night, worrying their parents and even getting ambushed by a forest monster. Cradling the sleeping child snugly beneath a warm blanket, he admitted softly that he wished she would allow herself to be just as selfish as they once were. Even Sylvan pointed out how unusual it was that despite not being officially mated, she placed total trust in Seth, even accepting food straight from his hands. Listening to their words, Seth silently realized that sharing and feeding meals was a deeply sacred courtship behavior for dragonfolk that brought immense joy, though he wondered if he had ever actually explained this custom to her. Looked down at her serene face, acknowledging that beneath her quiet demeanor lay a bright curiosity and wonder, yet she never asked for anything or clung to anyone. Eve suggested simply asking her what she wanted. Seth pondered whether she simply didn't know how to rely on others. The elf cautioned that asking directly might only confuse her because of her considerate nature, leading Seth to wonder if his protective instincts were merely self-satisfaction. Wrestled with inner anxiety over whether his courtship driven by dragon instincts was truly right for her, or if she was quietly enduring it, desperately wanting to teach her how to live with complete freedom. Sylvan teased him lightly, pointing out that wanting her to choose him while restricting her interactions with other men was actually quite selfish on his part. Twins offered playful words of encouragement, urging the noble dragon to have more confidence in his bond with her. Eve smiled reassuringly, reminding Seth that if she didn't care for him deeply, she would never rest so peacefully in his embrace. Moments later, Wilziel stepped quietly back into the quarters after completing his formal obligations, apologizing softly in case he had disturbed their rest. Observed in quiet stillness as the young girl squirmed gently against his chest, adjusting her position in her sleep to settle deeper into his warmth. She murmured his name softly in her slumber. Seth felt the agonizing weight of his dragon instincts screaming to claim her. Yet despite that primal urge, he yearned for something far deeper, a genuine connection of souls, where she would choose and acknowledge him as her mate of her own free will. Concluding that his overwhelming desires were selfish, he resolved to keep these hidden emotions locked away so she would never be burdened by them as their companions gathered quietly around the crackling campfire beneath the starlit sky. 1 week later, the party finally arrived at the grand estate in the royal capital, where a line of attendants bowed low to welcome back Prince Wilziel. As the young noble bade them a casual farewell, Yui looked on in wide-eyed realization, finally grasping that he truly was royal. Within an opulent reception room, the attendants offered warm hospitality, informing the group that their audience with His Majesty the Dragon King was scheduled for the afternoon. They invited everyone to rest, wash away their travel weariness, and enjoy light refreshments in the meantime. Exquisite spread of tea, delicate pastries, and light bites was carefully laid out across tiered stands for their enjoyment. As they settled in, Celeste suggested that once Yui finished eating, they should wash off the travel grime and change into attire suitable for their upcoming audience. Yui paused, noticing a curious phrasing in his words. Dressed in elegant new clothes, Yui looked up in wonder as Celeste praised her outfit, while she admiringly noted how striking and cool he appeared in his own formal attire. Before heading out, Yui asked if there were specific etiquette rules to follow when meeting the king. Celeste demonstrated the proper noble greeting, patiently showing her how women step back with their right foot and lower their skirts gracefully. Explained that in the nation of Dragonkin, a slight bow of the head is all that is typically expected, as their instinctual pride dictates they bow only to the strongest of their kind, even when addressing royalty. Royal guards arrived at the chamber doors, announcing that they had come to escort Lord Universe's mate and companion to the audience hall. With everything in order, Celeste signaled that it was time to proceed. Guided through the grand marble hallways of the palace, they reached the massive double doors leading into the throne room, where the guards formally announced that His Majesty awaited inside. Stepping into the hall, Yui caught a glimpse of an elderly attendant who offered them a subtle, reassuring glance. The old attendant offered a gentle smile, quietly offering words of comfort that the Dragon King was a kind and gentle sovereign. Seated upon the ornate double throne sat the majestic Dragon King, beside Prince Wilzeal, who turned his gaze directly toward Yui. Celeste and Yui offered formal greetings, bowing gracefully before His Majesty the Dragon King and His Highness the Second Prince. Dragon King warmly dismissed the rigid formalities, inviting them to relax and join him for tea. Black tea was presented. Yui quietly reflected on the familiarity of the scene, once again detecting an unexpectedly human touch in the Dragon Kingdom's customs. He listened quietly as the Dragon King welcomed them, expressing his sincere gratitude for their long journey across the realm. Monarch acknowledged that without their presence, Wilzeal likely would not have returned, though the young prince quietly remarked that his absence was better for his brother. Observing their interaction, she realized their familial bond was intact, listening as Wilzeal explained his reasons for remaining in Granzel, while his father gently asked him to write back more often, before shifting the conversation to the main topic. Turning his focus to the core matter, the king brought up the topic of soulmates, revealing that long ago, another dragonkin had taken a human mate just like them. Wilzeal recognized the ancient legend, and the king recounted how thousands of years ago, a dragonkin knight instantly recognized her destined soulmate upon meeting a young human man. United in love, the vast gap in their lifespans plagued them with sorrow, as the dragonkin dreaded outliving her mortal companion. Through relentless research, the couple unlocked a spell to share half the caster's lifespan, leaving her astonished at the revelation. Overjoyed by the discovery, the lovers celebrated what seemed to be a miraculous way to spend the same span of time together. Their joy proved fleeting. As decades passed, the human man's mind began to unravel under the unnatural weight of centuries. Stripped of his humanity by watching generations of friends and family wither away, he lost all grasp of time and sanity. King somberly explained that a human mind was simply incapable of bearing several hundred years of existence until it was far too late to undo. Unable to endure the agonizing burden any longer, the man ultimately chose to end his life by throwing himself into a river. Overwhelmed by grief and guilt for causing her mate suffering, the dragonkin lost all reason and went on a devastating rampage, destroying the city and harming countless citizens and kin who attempted to restrain her. Born from a tragedy where two souls merely sought happiness together, a strict law was established across the Dragon Kingdom forbidding any magic that alters or extends lifespan. Including the grave history, the king revealed that they had summoned them across the realm to sign a binding legal pledge. Listened quietly as the solemn demand was issued, requiring an absolute vow never to extend his mate's lifespan, while the formal magical contract was placed before them. Sovereign acknowledged the cruelty of forbidding a known spell that could keep them together, but reiterated that it was necessary to prevent another devastating tragedy. As the young child held onto him tightly, a sobering thought took root. Once a human life ends, what fate awaits the one left behind? Surrounded by loyal friends and trusted companions like Wilzeal and Valentine who would remain by his side, a lingering void remained. Dragonkin's mate comes only once in a lifetime, and with their lifespan spanning up to 2,000 years while he was not yet 300, the painful reality became clear that one day his beloved partner would simply no longer be there. Holding the child close, they both faced the harsh truth that they could not avert their eyes from. A long, inescapable future where he would spend the rest of his centuries alone. The Celeste Universe presents a formal document prohibiting forbidden magic activation and asks Yui to sign the lifespan-sharing oath. Gently reaching out, Yui takes his hand, her expression soft and solemn as she accepts the bond. Understanding her quiet resolve, he gently requests her to step back slightly so he can begin the ritual. Swirling light and radiant mana burst forth as he channels powerful magic to bind their fates together. Enveloped in a dazzling aura of light, he holds her close as the magical contract weaves its binding spell around them. As the brilliant glow subsides, he cradles her gently in his arms and expresses his deep gratitude, assuring her that the ritual will not interfere with any other magic. Holding her securely on the couch, he offers his full support and comfort, assuring her that whatever she requires during her time in the capital will be provided. Nearby, Valentine comments on the severity of the situation, remarking that forcing a written oath is going too far and expressing resentment towards such meddling. He adds that only a dragonkin who has experienced the profound connection with a true mate can genuinely comprehend the lengths one would go for them. Reflecting further, he acknowledges that when it comes to preserving the life of one's mate, one cannot help but make choices that others might deem wrong. Memory lingers of how frail her body was, enduring painful healing magic because he simply could not bring himself to let her die peacefully. Gear pours a drink while offering his perspective, noting that Celeste is ultimately a rational man who would never intentionally cause his mate prolonged suffering. He asserts that despite the agonizing anguish it brings, Celeste would choose to let his mate go if remaining bound caused her pain, for that is the true depth of his love. Sitting in the quiet room beside her sleeping form, Celeste grapples with his internal conflict, realizing that forcibly altering her destiny to prolong her life holds no true meaning if it brings her pain. Gazing down at her peaceful face, he is forced to confront the harsh reality that this desperate choice has been placed before him once more. He reflected quietly on the reality that his partner would not live even a fraction of his own long lifespan, finding solace in the fact that he would at least be able to watch over her for the rest of her days. Leaning over the sleeping girl, he gently touched his forehead to hers, silently resolving to treasure every single day they had together. Meanwhile, in an adjacent parlor, quiet footfalls and light knocks on the door interrupted the heavy silence. Entering the room, he greeted Will, asking his companion to use the proper doorway rather than leaning outside on the balcony. Will explained that Yui had grown exhausted from the rushed carriage journey and had already fallen asleep, warning that wandering the castle could risk unwanted attention from rival noble factions. Noticing how much food had been sent up, Will invited him to share a drink, to which he readily agreed. Later, as they strolled through the vibrant streets of the royal capital, Yui marveled at the sights, mentioning it was her first time visiting the heart of the kingdom. Cheerful catkin tour guide named Millie bounced up to them alongside a massive centaur driver, offering her assistance to guide them through the city. Millie explained that adopting a friendly, cute demeanor helped put visiting children at ease, an explanation that made total sense to the young girl. As they boarded the open-air carriage, the young girl proudly pointed out the demon and centaur heritage of their guides, earning praise for her sharp observation. They arrived at the Grand Fountain Plaza, where Millie introduced the towering statue of the first Dragon King and explained the local legend of tossing a coin into the jar for good fortunes. Eager to test her luck, the child asked for a coin to toss into the distant statue's vessel. Surprising focus and precision, she wound up and pitched the copper coin across the plaza, landing it squarely inside the jar with a satisfying clink. Millie erupted in applause at the impressive shot, while the noble elf commended her skill and expressed his joy at seeing her happy. Looking up at him with a warm smile, she revealed that the winning throw had actually been made using his coin, declaring that she was already happy just being by his side. Having successfully landed the coin, the child looked up at Celeste with a warm, hopeful smile, wishing for his happiness as well. Observing that he had seemed quietly troubled ever since hearing the king's story, the young child offered a sincere expression of gratitude. In response, Celeste looked down with profound tenderness, gently assuring that true joy had filled his life ever since the young child had come into it, leaving both of them wrapped in a quiet, touching moment of mutual affection. Tender exchange was soon interrupted by their enthusiastic cat guide, who cheerfully signaled for them to move along to their next destination at the cathedral clock. At the dining table, Celeste offered a piece of fruit to Yui, asking if she found it tasty as she observed the sweet treat. Gently fed her a small bite, watching intently as she took the food into her mouth. Upon tasting the fruit, her eyes widened in pure delight at the sudden burst of rich sweetness. Chewing happily with flushed cheeks, her joyful expression caused him to blush slightly, quietly realizing how easily he could become addicted to such a sight. After finishing their meal, Celeste asked Yui about her plans for the afternoon, to which she expressed a desire to visit a bookstore and buy souvenirs, specifically requesting a dictionary. As they walked through the bustling commercial district, she admitted her fondness for dictionaries, captivated by how much knowledge was packed inside them. Stepping inside the grand bookstore, she gasped in awe at the massive multi-tiered archives towering around them. Guided to the reference section, she eagerly browsed the tall shelves packed with reference volumes and dictionaries. Gaze caught sight of a specific spine tucked among the books, titled To the Mates of Dragonkin. Opening the text, she read the opening lines, which promised to guide anyone seeking to truly understand and walk alongside a dragonkin. Approaching her from behind, Celeste inquired if she had managed to find a suitable book, noticing her deep engrossment. He confirmed that she had, prompting him to suggest shipping the bulk of their purchases ahead, while keeping whatever she wished to read immediately. Clutching the selected scrolls tightly in her hands, she readily agreed to his plan. He subsequently traveled to the Kameda River shop along the busy canals, seeking out special gem accessories as souvenirs. He admiringly inspected a striking bracelet crafted from alternating red and green stones alongside a matching hair accessory, thinking how lovely it would look on her companion. Deciding on the choice, she handed over the selection with absolute certainty, eager to acquire a gift of her own. Noticing her interest, Celeste requested an identical set from the vendor, suggesting that Valentine would also love matching accessories. However, the child firmly insisted on paying for all the souvenirs herself, determined to use the coins she had earned through her own effort for everyone back at the office. Yielding to her determination with a gentle smile, Celeste stepped back, leaving her beaming with pride as she held the package bought with her hard-earned income. Thoughts of everyone's joy filled her heart, imagining how delighted Millie and the others would be upon receiving their individual water charms. Before leaving, the pair shared a tranquil moment, softly exchanging sincere wishes for each other's continued health and safety. Night fell over the quiet domain, and within the comfort of her dimly lit room, she settled onto her bed to open the freshly purchased book. She opened the cover, her mind drifted to Celeste's constant, gentle smile, wondering what genuine thoughts lay hidden beneath that serene expression. Reading through the opening lines, a sudden passage caught her entirely off guard, causing her to pause in astonishment. Text detailed how dragonkin, despite their immense life force and strength, carry a persistent, innate sense of isolation and emptiness from birth. Chronicler went on to explain that the only individual capable of dispelling this lifelong solitude is their designated mate. Further revealed that a dragonkin pours unconditional affection into their partner, clinging tightly to them to prevent separation, recalling Celeste's tender words about her presence. Turning to the following page, the document explicitly listed the exact behavioral patterns associated with their courtship, described constant offerings of gifts, relentless physical affection, and overwhelming protectiveness, every single action matching Celeste's behavior toward her. He sat frozen in the quiet room as the ancient text laid plain the truth behind his gestures, that feeding her so attentively had not been mere pampering but an innate, deliberate act of dragonkin devotion. Every gift he had offered, including the rare magical trinket crafted to amplify feelings of happiness, took on a far deeper meaning, leading her to the next revelation regarding the act of kneeling. Passage made it absolute. A proud dragonkin kneels only of their own free will before their chosen mate, a gesture equivalent to surrendering their absolute devotion to that person. Sitting alone on the vast bed in the dimly lit chamber, the weight of the realization left her completely speechless. Mind replayed every detail recorded in the book, noting that even before the king, dragonkin merely bow their heads slightly. Yet while Wilzeal had never knelt before her, Celeste had lowered himself without hesitation. Memories flooded back of the moment he had dropped to one knee, taking her hand to assure her that he was not her enemy, but the person destined to become her partner. It was from the very beginning a singular sacred courtship granted only once in a dragonkin's lifetime. Clutching the fabric over her chest as an intense blush flushed her cheeks, her heart pounded violently at the realization that every gentle word had been a true declaration of love. Having learned the deeper meaning behind dragonkin behavior, Yui was feeling slightly restless as she packed her bags. Though she wondered whether Celeste had noticed the ancient book she carried, he offered no sign of suspicion as he gently asked if she was ready to leave. The morning of their fourth day in the royal capital, the time came at last to return to Granzel. Wilzeal stood at the doorway, fully prepared for the journey, and called out to see if everyone was set. As they prepared to depart, the twin brothers asked whether they would be taking a shared carriage for the trip back. Celeste clarified that he had arranged their travel specifically through the Adventurers Guild. After bidding a fond farewell to the young elf twins, Yui found herself curious about the nature of the guild, asking Celeste to explain what an Adventurers Guild actually was. Celeste explained that they had been granted permission to travel alongside the Alberus Company's merchant caravan, guarded by an elite adventurer team known as the Breath of Fresh Green. When Yi questioned the distinction between city guards and adventurers, Celeste detailed how guards maintain order within settlements, whereas adventurers accept dynamic requests through the guild, where absolute strength dictates everything. Wilzeal chimed in, admitting that he too had once considered becoming an adventurer for the fixed salary, though he ultimately chose the Guard Corps under Seth's guidance, recognizing it as a more fitting path for a prince. Arriving before the impressive headquarters of the Albarist Company, the group met with the merchant representative, where Celeste politely greeted them and introduced their party for the journey. The robust dwarven merchant, Eldon, welcomed them warmly. Known throughout the capital for running a highly reliable merchant group, Eldon assured Wilzeal that he would personally take great care of their group during the 2.5-week trip to Granzel. Eldon went on to offer introductions to their hired escort team, emphasizing that trust is paramount for merchants, and promising that the Breath of Fresh Green would fulfill their duty flawlessly. Leader of the escort team stepped forward, an imposing elf named Asvela. Yui looked up in awe, instantly recognizing the legendary aura of an elf commander. Yui recalled reading that elven teams like the Breath of Fresh Green were renowned for their exclusivity and exceptional skill in mountain escorts. Observing Asvela's vigilant stance and well-maintained weaponry, Yui inwardly marveled at the total lack of openings in their defense. Asvela's sharp gaze swept over the party, meticulously evaluating every member present with practiced tactical precision. Noticing the presence of 2 dragonkin, Asvela acknowledged how reassuring it was to have them along, especially given that one possessed healing magic. Wilzeal modestly noted that while his healing skills were limited, he could more than make up for it in martial combat. Turning her attention to Yui, Asvela casually remarked on her young age and human status. With quiet confidence, Asvela assured them all to leave their safety entirely in her team's hands. He let out a sigh of relief upon learning that young elves leaving their villages were uncommon, though observing another young girl already working brought a lingering sense of familiarity. Seeing her discomfort, a cheerful dwarf merchant invited her to ride inside the cargo carriage alongside the others, signaling for the caravan to depart once everyone was settled. With armed guards on horseback leading the way, the heavy wagons began their steady march along the dusty road toward Granzel. Inside the jostling wooden wagon, she realized how much rougher this ride was compared to luxury transport, until Celeste softly gestured for her to move closer, offered his lap as a cushion against the violent shaking, making her pause in sudden embarrassment at the unexpected invitation. Before she could decline, he gently gathered her into his arms, reminding her that the long journey ahead required saving her strength. Dragonkin, close physical contact is vital. Courtship eases their deep loneliness, easing their possessive instincts through shared warmth and proximity. Slightly unsettling, his protective embrace provided a soothing comfort that earned fond glances from the fellow travelers sharing the carriage. Watching the pair, the dwarf merchant smiled warmly, mentioning how seeing such affection made him miss his own wife back home. Chatted with Wilzeal about the young couple's bond, noting with amusement that despite their age difference, their courtship was progressing remarkably well. Overhearing their candid conversation, her cheeks flushed with deep crimson as she tried to process their teasing observations. The caravan paused for a rest. Celeste tentatively checked to make sure she was feeling all right after hours of rough travel, requested that she stay within his sight as the merchants tended to the horses, and she obediently agreed before walking toward a grassy spot. While sitting quietly on a tree stump, a faint rustle drew her attention, causing her to glance back toward the nearby wagon. Standing by the wheel, a young boy with light wavy hair stared intently at her, unable to pull his gaze away from her presence. Sitting alone at the dining table with a meal in front of her, Diz reflected on how much she missed Yui. Their respective obligations kept them distant, and now Yui was away on a month-long trip, leaving her feeling deeply lonely in the quiet house. 6 months had passed since she began living with her guardian, yet the distance between everyone remained palpable. While she accepted that official summons from the royal capital were unavoidable, and took comfort in both of their thriving careers, a persistent ache of longing lingered. Living arrangements had been carefully arranged by law, because Dissy was officially adopted as a daughter, while Celeste, being younger, could only register Yui under temporary legal protection. According to the laws of the realm, high elves over 200 years old possessed the legal authority to adopt children, whereas Dragonkin required 350 years to do so. Thus, at 721 years of age, Valentine Barbier officially adopted Dissy, while 276-year-old Celeste took in Yui as a protected ward. Despite her young age, Dissy filled the household with vibrant energy. She was remarkably skilled at domestic chores, often eagerly taking charge of looking after the household instead of resting. Yet behind her bright demeanor, quiet doubts often weighed on her mind. She constantly pondered if Yui was truly happy residing with Celeste, recalling the desperate plea she had overheard from him at the gambling hall when he begged for her life. She had eventually awakened after that harrowing ordeal. Valentine patiently explained everything that had transpired. He laid out the truth about the gambling hall, the human protection zones, and the path that lay ahead in terms she could easily understand. Observing Celeste's fierce devotion, she became convinced he would treasure Yui above all else. It was that profound certainty that prompted her to encourage Yui to go with him in the first place. While humans lack the ability to intuitively sense their destined mates, Yui's conscious avoidance of physical contact with anyone else made her feelings obvious. Though it remained unclear whether those feelings were truly romantic, it was undeniable that Celeste held a singular, special place in her heart. As a veteran of the 2nd Guard Unit whose own father had served alongside Celeste's, Valentine had watched Celeste grow up from the very day he was born. Remembered the young boy who joined the 3rd Guard Unit and unexpectedly found his mate so soon. Though Celeste was granting Yui the freedom to choose her own path, the prospect of rejection for a Dragonkin was devastating beyond words. Acknowledging that only Yui could determine her own happiness, they took comfort in seeing her constantly looking toward the future with resolve. Their serious discussion was suddenly interrupted when Valentine blundered while cooking, forcing Dissy to jump up and intervene before he ruined their meal entirely. Apologizing with a gentle smile, he reflected on the 5 centuries that had passed since he left the elf forest alone. The silent, empty house he had inhabited for so long was now continually filled with warmth and laughter. Vibrant presence was slowly healing the deep-seated solitude in his heart. Yet a poignant truth remained. This lively child would age and pass away in what felt like a mere blink of an eye to an immortal elf. Gazing warmly at her across the table, he urged her to pursue her own happiness rather than constantly worrying about others. He resolved to cherish every single decade they would share together. She beamed with genuine joy, affirming that her happiness was already complete. As the scene shifted to Yui sitting quietly outdoors while a young boy approached her near a parked carriage. The young boy walked closer across the open field, his eyes fixed on the young girl resting alone on the grass. Reaching out with a friendly gesture, he offered her a piece of candy, asking if she would like to have some. Nearby onlookers observed the interaction, whispering among themselves about her status as a Dragonkin's mate. Celeste listened quietly, his serene gaze fixed ahead as he insisted they let her do as she pleased. From a short distance away, he watched the 2 children interact peacefully by the edge of the path, reasoned internally that it was fine, sensing no malice from the boy and resolving not to restrict Yui's world. Telling himself there was no real danger, he resolved to simply turn his gaze away. Even as he tried to convince himself that he didn't need to look or interfere, his eyes involuntarily narrowed as he monitored them. Intense instinctual urge surged within him, recognizing the boy as a male of the same kind and age, causing him to grip his chest tightly in possessive agony. Despite his inner turmoil, Celeste maintained a composed exterior as Yui stood up to address the young boy. The boy tilted his head in mild confusion, waiting for her response. Slightly shaking her head, Yui declined the treat, explaining that she wasn't hungry, while thanking him for the gesture. 2 introduced themselves properly, with her declaring her name as Yui and the boy introducing himself as Cyril from the Alberus Trading Company. Cyril continued chatting about his work as a chevalier under Lady Beatrice and his ambition to run his own business, causing Yui to silently reflect on how similar his background felt to her own past. He asked the young boy if he had paper and pen, offering to teach him calculations. Surprised by her sudden proposition, Cyril stammered in confusion, wondering what she meant. His eyes lit up with sudden excitement, a wide, genuine smile breaking across his face at the prospect of learning. Eagerly turning away, he announced he would fetch the supplies from his boss, bounding off toward the merchant camp while she watched him go. He raised a small hand in a quiet gesture of farewell as the young merchant dashed over to his employer, who was seated beside Celeste. The boy ran off in the distance. Celeste gently pulled the young girl into his lap, surrounding her with protective warmth while they rested on the grass together. Looking up into Celeste's tender gaze, a quiet sense of comfort settled in her heart, knowing that having someone who truly understood her was more than enough. Hunched over a sheet of paper covered in addition problems, the young boy hesitated, tapping his pen as he pondered adding 50 to 30. Nearby inside the shaded camp, the companions gathered around the makeshift desk, offering quiet encouragement and guidance. Breaking down the problem, the nobleman suggested grouping the smaller digits first, pointing out that combining 2 and 8 made 10, which together with 30 and 50 totaled 90. Beside him, the girl warmly confirmed the boys' progress. Grateful for their patience, an elder villager presented them with a token of appreciation, explaining that while the boy worked hard, calculation was his greatest struggle. Receiving their thanks, she reflected on how much kindness she herself had been shown by good people, harboring a deep desire to pass that same gentleness along to others. Observing the young student, the noble lord recognized a subtle resemblance to her, understanding why the usually timid child had warmed up to him so quickly. Suddenly, a pen clattered onto the floor, rolling away from the study table. Reaching down simultaneously, the children startled as their hands brushed together near the fallen pen. Watching the exchange with a gentle smile, she looked on as the lord quietly pulled the young girl into a comfortable embrace on his lap. Confused by the sudden movement, the two children glanced back toward their guardians. Turning her gaze slightly, she quietly watched him nurture the child with profound tenderness. After returning to the wagon, the young girl had climbed straight onto his lap, acting as if it were the most natural place in the world for her to be. Though a touch of sorrow weighed on him, an overwhelming joy washed over his heart, knowing how deeply she held him in her affection. Round them, the rest of the traveling companions observed the scene with fondness, bathed in the quiet warmth of the afternoon. Listened quietly as the dwarf merchant remarked on how enviable it was to have such a kind and intelligent girl as a maid at his age. Gently resting his head near hers, he softly confessed his deep gratitude that Yui was his mate, a sentiment that brought a warm, tender comfort to them both. He quietly echoed the sentiment, admitting to herself that she too was glad that her mate was Celeste. Looking down at her intertwined hands, she reflected on how, despite not fully accepting the concept of being mates, she remained profoundly grateful that it was Celeste who had taken her in. As the carriage rolled through the quiet forest trail, the dwarf mused about whether love required mutual understanding, noting that watching the pair made him miss his own wife. Walking ahead beside Wilziel, he appeared to be in high spirits, leading Wilziel to comment on his light-hearted mood and how he seemed completely unbothered by having Yui nearby. He discussed the nature of their bond, clarifying that because Yui was still only 13, there were no romantic feelings involved, nor any possibility of marriage anytime soon. Fundamental truth lingered in his thoughts. Love is not something that happens instantly, but rather something that takes time to nurture and grow. Like other races who often chose companions simply as good friends or family, Dragonkin possessed overwhelming instincts that rarely allowed them to marry anyone other than their destined mate. Considered the 3 remaining years until she reached human adulthood at 16, resolving that whether she chose to become his spouse or not, having her remain by his side was more than enough. Snapping back to the present, he called out to Yui, who was happily crouching nearby as Cyril approached them. Cyril turned back toward the camp, calling out to ask for a helping hand with their tasks. Seeing how well everyone was getting along, Wilziel offered a warm farewell as he prepared to go on patrol with his companions. Dwarf merchant sternly reminded the travelers that no one must ever lay a finger on a Dragonkin's mate, warning that any resulting injury would be entirely their own fault. As he explained that no one could control themselves when it came to protecting their mate, she caught a glimpse of his intensity and felt a familiar spark of tension rise again. She observed the tender look in Celeste's eyes, realizing it was identical to the affectionate gaze her father used to cast upon her mother. Hesitantly, she gathered the courage to ask Celeste if he was upset with her regarding Cyril. Reassuring her with a warm smile, he expressed his gratitude, explaining that he was not angry at all because she was simply being cautious, causing a soft sigh of relief to escape her lips. When Celeste expressed gladness that she had made a friend in Cyril, she tilted her head in confusion, unsure of what the term truly meant, even as Celeste observed that the young boy already regarded her as one. Meanwhile, their journey continued as the covered carriage rolled steadily down the dirt road, flanked by armed guards on horseback. Inside the carriage, Celeste praised the young girl for mastering addition in just 3 days, leaving Cyril thoroughly impressed by her rapid progress. Preparing another set of math problems for Cyril, Celeste handed over the sheet while she sat quietly beside them, watching the lesson unfold. Turning to her, Cyril curiously questioned why she was taking the time to teach him mathematics. He gently explained that he reminded her of a friend named Dissy, noting the striking similarity in their hair and eye color, a revelation that made Cyril freeze as his hand gripped the paper tightly. Overwhelmed by a sudden flicker of desperate hope, Cyril leaned forward intently, frantically asking her about this friend's age, whether she was a girl, and if there was any chance she was a slave. As the pieces began to fall into place, Yui suddenly wondered if Cyril might have had an older sister. He questioned Cyril directly, asking if his village had been attacked 3 years prior. Continuing his thoughts, he noted that Dissy was also 14 years old, human, and just a year older than himself. But unlike Big Sis, Dissy was remarkably tiny despite being a year older. Wilziel explained that Dissy was her current name, but back when she was a slave, she was referred to only by a number. He added that she had been taken in by elves and was now working at the reception desk for the guard squad, prompting an emotional reaction from the young boy. Seeing how closely the details aligned, the group decided that since they were already planning to stop by the Granziel guard squad, they should go together to check if she was indeed Cyril's sister. Granziel reassured them that Dissy was doing fine, describing her as happy and cared for by a friendly elf colleague. Remembered Dissy mentioning her plan to save enough money once she grew older so she could search for her younger brother. Tears welled up in Cyril's eyes as he confessed that he had harbored the exact same dream, thinking he could become a merchant and travel to various towns to find her. Motivated by the revelation, Cyril eagerly asked Yui to teach him subtraction next so he could work hard too, while Yui warmly recalled how Big Sis had always strived her best for him as well. Looking at the striking resemblance, Yui felt certain that Dissy had to be Cyril's older sister. Outside, their carriage continued its steady journey under the night sky. Inside the carriage, the tired travelers rested quietly by the soft light of a lantern. Granziel commended Cyril's progress as Yui tutored him in math, expressing a desire to reunite Dissy with her brother as soon as they reached Granziel. Inquiring about their journey's progress, Yui learned that they had already traveled for a week and were halfway to Granziel. Glancing out the window, he quietly realized how much he longed to go home soon. Though traveling wasn't bad, Yui reflected on the warmth of the estate, Celine's welcoming smile, the delicious meals, and his soft bed. Realizing that place had truly become his home, rested peacefully, listening to the gentle conversations around him about bathing and resting after a long journey. Standing alone at the base of the staircase, the young boy pondered whether warmth and safety were truly what defined a place as home. He clutched his book tightly to his chest, wondering in awe if this peaceful reality was merely a dream. Raising the stairs to joyful, humming melodies, he observed the light-hearted atmosphere filling the corridor. As he looked on, he caught sight of the radiant, serene faces sharing a tender moment. Stepping forward, he greeted them warmly with a gentle good morning, receiving affectionate morning wishes in return. Noticing how generous his breakfast serving was, he questioned if it was truly meant for him while the tall noble smiled down warmly. Surrounded by such profound affection, he watched as deep expressions of love were exchanged right before his eyes. Observing the altered seating arrangement, he quietly reflected on what the future might hold for them all. While affectionate offers were made to stay home together for his happiness, a subtle twinge of jealousy surfaced inside him. Even amidst shared laughter and reliance on one another, a lingering sense of trouble weighed on his mind. Acknowledging the gentle, treasuring nature of his guardian, he admitted to himself that while he held deep affection, he still didn't truly understand the nature of love. Pondered over thoughts of acceptance and whether embracing such bonds would transform his own warm smile into something deeper. Reading through ancient texts detailing how dragonkin yearned deeply for the love of their mates, he reflected on the profound nature of these creatures. Looking up with glistening eyes, a tear rolled down as he whispered the name of his cherished guardian, contemplating the true meaning of love. As he lay resting alongside the other children, the gentle voice of Celeste softly called out his name, breaking the quiet stillness of the room. Looking up at the man's familiar expression, he reflected on that serene smile, a smile he longed to hold close and preserve forever. Concerned by how Celeste remained sitting upright, he softly asked if he was truly resting enough, only for Celeste to laugh gently and explain that years on guard duty had made such habits second nature. Feeling the large, gentle hand tenderly caressing his cheek, he knew with absolute certainty that this person held him dear and would never bring him harm. The gaze filled with deep, quiet warmth, Celeste softly declared him to be his most precious person. Tears welling in his eyes, he reached up to touch Celeste's cheek, realizing that even if the subtleties of romance remained beyond his understanding, what truly mattered was that they meant everything to each other. Folded in a warm, protective embrace within the softly lit room, he held fast to the peaceful hope that one day he would come to love him just as deeply, patiently awaiting the time when that dream would finally come true. As the carriage ambles along the forest road, the high elf guard scans the canopy, unnerved by the heavy silence that hangs over the trees. Inside the covered wagon, the young travelers notice that the usual forest sounds have completely vanished. The elf calmly explains that his barrier spell isolates the wagon's interior from the outside world, insulating them from ambient noise. Assuring the vehicle's safety with a glowing ward, he remains composed even as wild gray wolves suddenly burst from the thicket in a furious stampede. Before anyone can react to the pack, a massive red bear crashes through the trees, towering over the road with lethal fury. Seeing the monstrous beast, the young warrior Sylvan confidently steps forward to tackle the bear alone, eager to claim its meat while his companions prepare to handle the surrounding wolf pack with wind magic. Leaps high into the air, drawing his sword in a swift fluid motion as the bear rears up. The single devastating arc of his blade, he cleaves through the giant creature, bringing it crashing to the dirt in an instant display of raw swordsmanship. Meanwhile, the tall elf conjures bright magical crests, commanding the team to hold the line so the path remains clear for the wagon. Joining the fray, the noble magician releases a burst of wind magic that sweeps away the attacking wolves effortless, leaving the young onlookers in awe of their overwhelming power. Suddenly, young Cyril trips and tumbles out from the safety of the group, wailing as he falls headlong into the danger zone. Ignoring the frantic cries from his companions to stay back, he desperately brandishes a wooden stick in an attempt to fight, only to lose his footing. The crude wooden weapon snaps upon impact with the ground, leaving him defenseless as a snarling wolf leaps directly toward him. 17 scolds the boy for his recklessness. Yu silently watches the unfolding peril and decides to act. Stepping calmly between the frightened boy and the advancing beast, the child extends a bare hand toward the oncoming predator without without a hint of fear. Confronted by this sudden aura of absolute composure, the feral wolf halts its charge, hesitating before the small child. He called out to Cyril, urging him to get back as 17 stood before her in protection. Reflecting on past struggles, she recognized how much harder combat was in a fragile human body. Knowing that matching an opponent in raw strength was impossible. From a distance, Valentine shouted for the children to hold on, promising they would arrive soon. Meanwhile, 17 kicked fiercely at the advancing wolf, forcing the beast back as it snarled in frustration. Overpowered by her calm dominance, the wolves whimpered, turned around, and began to flee into the forest, completely demoralized. Shielding Cyril behind her, she realized that pacifying them with words was not working. Lacking both a weapon and a way to defend herself, she accepted that victory in battle was out of her reach. Memories of her grueling past surfaced, reminding her that her battles had never been fair. She had fought not just other slave children, but hardened adult criminals, always outnumbered and outmatched. Driven purely by a desperate refusal to die, she had fought relentlessly and survived countless bloody encounters. Yet, looking back at that endless trail of violence, she questioned the purpose of it all. The fierce beasts lunged directly at her. A realization dawned in her mind. Right now, winning no longer mattered. Suddenly, a massive wall of razor-sharp ice burst from the ground, shattering into a dazzling display as it instantly blocked the attacking beasts. Roaring with furious protection, Celeste intervened, commanding the monsters to stay away from her. Driven by the deep bond he held for the child, dropped to his knees and pulled her into a tight, protective embrace, shielding her from all danger as she realized she was now protected by someone who truly cherished her. Overwhelmed with emotion, Celeste checked her frantically, asking if she was hurt or injured, berating her for running out unarmed. She gasped softly in his tight hold, assuring him that she was unharmed. Smiling gently despite the chaos, she offered a quiet apology, teasingly noting that he was embracing her a little too tightly. Rested his forehead against hers, staying silent for a long moment before quietly apologizing for his overwhelming distress. Kneeling on the ground, Celeste buried his face in her shoulder, begging her never to throw herself into danger like that again. Trembling, he admitted that his heart had nearly stopped from fear, while she gently apologized, sensing the icy coldness of his hands. Observing Celeste's intense grief and relief, she pondered the truth of their connection, realizing that if Cyril truly was 17's little brother, then Celeste's protective nature ran deeper than she had ever understood. He looked down quietly, admitting that the only thing she truly wished to avoid was bringing sorrow to the sister figure who meant everything to her. Thoughts drifted to the painful possibility of losing someone so cherished, realizing that anyone in her position would have risked their life just the same. Quiet determination in her eyes, she whispered a gentle apology, declaring that if danger ever threatened again, she would not hesitate to stand and fight. Nearby, the adult nobleman listened, nodding in solemn understanding. Nearby, Sylvan finished off the remaining threat with a swift strike, declaring the battle over. The surrounding onlookers immediately began checking on Cyril while offering heartfelt gratitude to the noble lord for intervening to protect the children. Travel companions offered sincere apologies to the lord for failing to maintain a proper watch, noting that despite prior battles on their journeys, such an incident had never occurred. However, the nobleman brushed off their apologies, recognizing the natural instinct to act and turning his attention to the young boy's well-being. As he began to voice his regrets, one of the elder companions gently interrupted, asking if the young boy could express his feelings himself. Holding the young girl close near their luggage, the lord lowered his voice and softly pleaded with her to promise that she would never wander away from safety again. He stood firm in his refusal to let her risk herself, walking toward the camp as she watched him with a mix of wonder and reflection. The stern, uncompromising glare, Celeste declared that rushing into battle without the power to fight was not bravery at all. Lying motionless on the ground, Cyril pondered the harsh truth that trying to save one life at the cost of others left no one truly saved, bringing only further suffering to those left behind. Haunted by painful memories of bondage and desperate flight, he had believed that simply staying alive was enough, thinking that standing and fighting was a foolish mistake. The crushing realization dawned upon him that his reckless choices might have inflicted that very same agony upon Lord Wilzeal. Harrowing thought of Yui being harmed or ripped away from her loved ones because of his actions weighed heavily on his conscience. Celeste maintained a silent, unyielding gaze, his expression unreadable yet sharp as steel. Turning to the young boy, he plainly stated that whether Cyril ended up injured or dead was entirely his own affair. His eyes flared with intense dragonkin fervor as he commanded Cyril never to drag his beloved companion into harm's way again. Overwhelmed by remorse and shame, the young boy bowed his head and offered a trembling apology. Recalled his master's warning that dragonfolk endured deep agony whenever another male even approached their mate, and that his presence was tolerated solely through earned trust. Remembered how warmly Lord Wilzeal had celebrated the possibility of finding his long-lost sister. Standing alone in silence, he felt the aching weight of knowing that precious bond was now shattered. They walked along the dirt trail. The elder advisor reminded him that while emotions were natural, letting them dictate action was a dangerous liability. The old man urged him to remember that broken trust was nearly impossible to restore, yet encouraged him that as long as he lived, there remained a chance to start anew and make amends. Tears streamed freely down Cyril's face as he took the agonizing lesson to heart, resolved to earn back the faith he had lost. Having wiped away his tears, the boy sat quietly beside 17 as Sylvan approached, resting his broadsword on his shoulder and noting that their recent hunt yielded enough meat to last until Granzeal. Looking down at the quiet pair, the warrior gently admonished 17 to take better care of herself, reminding her that no one is happy when their mate dies. He offered a quiet apology, though Sylvan teased that she was supposed to promise not to do it again rather rather than just apologize. Turning his gaze to Celeste, Sylvan admitted that he would do the exact same thing if someone precious to him were in danger, finding common ground with the dragonfolk. Glancing toward the busy campsite, he contemplated the delicate balance of their situation. Reflected that for Lord Wilzeal's sake, as well as Celeste's and their own, they had to ensure Wilzeal never lost control and ended up like the tragic dragonfolk of ancient legends. Only a dragonfolk could handle another dragonfolk's mate, meaning if Wilzeal ever lost his sanity, Celeste, the person closest to him, would be forced to put him down. Admitting that merely imagining such a tragic fate was unbearable, Sylvan decided to head over and help butcher the red bear to clear his mind. Explained to Yui that red bears were powerful magical beasts, and that the stronger the magical beast, the better its meat tasted, eagerly anticipating dinner. Aside from Celeste becoming increasingly overprotective, the remainder of their journey passed smoothly without further incident as they shared meals under the open sky. Upon finally arriving at their destination, Sylvan stretched his arms in relief, declaring that Granziel was truly the absolute best. As the carriage rolled through the bustling town streets, they knew their long journey would finally conclude once they reported the completed request to the Adventurers Guild. Outside the guild, Celeste and Wilzeal bade farewell to Sylvan and Yvonne, thanking the twin brothers for accompanying them across such a long distance. Beyond providing delicious meat, magical beasts offered valuable materials like fur, fangs, and hide, highly prized by local merchants and adventurers alike. Sylvan walked away. After a swift goodbye, Yui called out after him, watching his departure as their joint escort mission officially came to an end. Looked at the young boy standing before him, who hesitated nervously before finally asking if they would ever meet again. Puzzled by the question, the young traveler pointed out that he had already taught him all the necessary calculations, prompting an embarrassed exclamation that math wasn't what he meant. The boy explained that they had only just gotten to know one another, expressing how lonely it felt to say goodbye so soon. Admitting that he still didn't fully understand, the traveler was interrupted as Cyril's adult companion stepped forward, firmly declaring that duty called. Cyril tried to protest. The older man laughed it off, insisting that work came first and couldn't be helped. Turning back with a warm look, the traveler explicitly instructed Cyril to visit the reception desk of the 2nd Guard Squad. Reassured by the offer, Cyril eagerly promised that he would come by the very next day without fail. The gentle wave. The young traveler watched as Cyril and his companion departed toward the waiting carriage in the town square. As they disappeared into the crowd, Celeste approached with a gentle smile, inviting him to return home together. Walking beside his guardian along the cobblestone street, he reflected quietly on whether it was truly all right for him to call such a place home. Looking up with a radiant, affectionate smile, he wholeheartedly agreed to head back home. Celeste reached down and grasped his small hand tightly, guiding him toward the place where they truly belonged. Side by side, the two continued down the quiet street, chatting pleasantly about Celine, her upcoming reaction to Yui's souvenir, and the delicious meal awaiting. Upon their return to the estate from the long journey to the royal capital, Celeste and Yui were warmly welcomed back by the household staff and companions waiting outside. Stepping forward to greet everyone, Celeste offered souvenirs brought back from their travels, including a gift specifically intended for Charles. Considering dragonfolk traditions, presenting gifts to a male companion from another was a delicate matter, leading Celeste to carefully handle the gesture on Yui's behalf. As the group exchanged pleasantries, Celine remarked on how much Yui seemed to have grown during the short month away, before inquiring if the child had seen Dissy yet. Celine urged Yui to go visit Dissy immediately, explaining that ever since the departure, Dissy had been completely devoid of energy, leaving everyone in the estate deeply concerned. Getting into the hall, Yui called out gently to Dissy, who was sitting slouched behind the reception desk. Hearing the familiar voice, Dissy gasped and turned around with wide, joyous eyes. Leaning eager over the counter, Dissy showered Yui with worried questions, asking about the journey, whether any illness had struck, and marveling at how much the child had grown. Reassuring her that all was well, Yui stood by while Celeste requested that Dissy ensure she remained at the reception desk that afternoon for an important matter. Softly breaking the topic, Yui asked Dissy to confirm the name of her younger brother, inquiring if he was named Cyril. Overcome with sudden emotion, Dissy paused, quietly confirming that Cyril was indeed her long-lost brother's name. Celeste and Yui revealed that representatives from the Albarist Trading Company were coming from the capital, including a young man who might very well be her missing sibling. Tears welled in Dissy's eyes as Celeste explained that the young worker possessed hair and eyes identical to hers, and had been actively searching for his older sister since their village was attacked 3 years ago. Seeing her tear up, Yui gently comforted Dissy, encouraging her to hold back her tears until they could confirm the young man's identity in person. Clasping hands tenderly, Yui smiled softly and offered heartfelt hope that the visitor truly would turn out to be her brother. Called away by another staff member to handle an incoming visitor, Dissy quickly wiped her face, promising Yui that they would continue their conversation as soon as her shift ended. He agreed warmly, taking her leave for the day and promising to return to her duties at the reception desk the following morning. They parted ways. The young boy silently prayed that the trader arriving from Albarist would truly turn out to be her long-lost brother. Meanwhile, outside the grand estate, the young trader named Cyril stood contemplating his upcoming reunion, remembering how his life changed after his village was raided and the surviving children were sold into captivity. Behind iron bars, ruthless captors had evaluated the young captives, noting with cold satisfaction that human children commanded handsome prices on the market. A benevolent master inquired if there were other children from the same village. He boldly declared that he would purchase every single one of them. Upon securing their release, the master had immediately freed them from bondage and offered them legitimate employment within his trading company. Determined to repay that profound kindness, Cyril had labored tirelessly, dreaming of becoming a prominent merchant so he could travel the world in search of his sister. He'd carefully set aside his earnings, resolving that if his sister remained trapped in servitude, he would buy her freedom just as his benefactor had done for him. Recalled the overwhelming helplessness that had paralyzed him on the fateful day their home was destroyed. He had repeatedly regretted charging forward recklessly in past crises. He knew his rashness came from an urgent desire to protect those he cherished. As his elderly mentor gently asked if he feared facing her, Cyril admitted that while he remained uncertain of the proper course, hesitation was no longer an option. Convinced that doing nothing was the only true mistake, he resolved to step forward and meet whatever awaited him. Stepping into the bustling interior of the Guildhall alongside his companions, the young man prepared himself for the moment he had anticipated for years. Guided toward the main reception counter, he scanned the area where she was said to be working. Turning at the sound of approaching footsteps, her eyes widened in shock as she recognized the youth before her, softly whispering his name. She stood frozen in place, her eyes wide with shock as the young boy called out to her softly. Tears immediately welled up in her eyes upon recognizing her brother's face. Overwhelmed by emotion, she burst into tears and threw her arms around Cyril, weeping frantically. He collapsed into her embrace, overcome with relief that his sister was truly alive. Cyril held her tight. A sudden realization struck him. She felt smaller than the grand figure he remembered from childhood, only to realize he had simply grown taller during their time apart. Memories of her comforting presence flooded Cyril's mind, bringing a fresh surge of tears. He wept openly, thanking her repeatedly for surviving through all the hardships. Smiling through her tears, she explained how Yui had given her hope by assuring her that Cyril was on his way, revealing that Yui's presence was the strength that kept her from giving up. Cyril choked back tears as he shared his own gratitude, remembering how Yui had saved him from a wolf and taught him arithmetic, cementing Yui as their shared savior. Holding each other close, the siblings chuckled softly, reflecting on Yui's extraordinary nature, a small, slender girl who had fearlessly leapt into a pack of dangerous magical beasts. Calling Yui's brave, clever, and strong spirit, Cyril silently realized the deeper feelings that had taken root in his heart long before he even understood them. Chastised himself for his foolishness, knowing Yui was already devoted to a powerful dragonfolk partner who was handsome, mature, and far superior in magic. Yet looking up with newfound resolve, Cyril accepted that even if Yui never saw him that way, standing by idly was something he could no longer bear. The radiant smile, Dissy shared how she and Cyril had cried their eyes out upon finally reuniting, expressing her deep gratitude to Yui for teaching him mathematics and helping rescue him from the magical beast. Yui, however, humbly insisted she had done nothing, noting that Cyril's own hard work made it possible, leaving Dissy overwhelmed with happiness. Looking at her joyful face, Yui reflected silently on how all she had ever wanted was to see that very smile, affirmed warmly by Dissy's enthusiastic agreement. They walked together down the cobblestone path. Dissy excitedly anticipated everyone eating together, mentioning that Cyril had been eager to see Yui too after their talk the previous day. Dissy explained Cyril's situation, revealing that he was returning to the royal capital to work hard toward becoming a merchant, determined to pay back the money spent to buy him as a slave rather than living together immediately, a choice she fully understood and supported. Fierce conviction, she declared her desire to repay the second guard squad in Valentine, while also expressing her earnest wish to stay by Yui's side. Dissy explained that this was where she belonged, worrying about leaving Valentine alone, while Yui listened appreciatively as Dissy shared their promise to write letters and treasure their respective dreams. Arriving at the gathering spot near the town square, Dissy greeted Cyril and Valentine, introducing Yui while Cyril offered his heartfelt gratitude to Valentine and Mr. Fenian for taking such good care of his sister. Inside the Silver Stag Inn, Cyril marveled at the grand dining room, admitting he had never been to such a fancy establishment, though Valentine reassured him not to worry about the expense. Over the meal, Cyril proudly shared that he could now read, write, and perform math, including multiplication and division, prompting Dissy to playfully declare that she could do all those things too. Dissy reminded Cyril that Yui had taught her first and that she remained the smarter older sister, even if Cyril had grown taller than her. Watching the siblings interact, Yui felt a pang of reserve, thinking that since it had been 3.5 years since they last saw each other, she shouldn't intrude on their reunion. Quietly picking at her food, she questioned why she felt so lonely despite being truly happy that Dissy and Cyril were finally back together. Noticing her quiet mood, Seth gently offered Yui a piece of fish from his fork, which she accepted with a soft word of thanks. Seth gave her a warm, reassuring smile. Yui gasped softly in mild surprise. Feeling the lingering loneliness fade away, Yui listened happily as Dissy presenting matching items for them to treasure together. Looking at her, he remarked quietly that she hadn't changed at all, reflected on the harsh reality that his sister had been taken from their village alone to serve as a combat slave, enduring far worse treatment than he ever had. It seemed almost miraculous to him that she was still capable of smiling so brightly despite everything. Recognized that even someone as stubborn and strong-willed as his sister might have broken down if left entirely alone, but she had been supported by her young companion. As the two girls bonded warmly over their shared love for books, he watched them interact, feeling genuinely glad that they had found each other. A quiet sadness washed over him as he admitted to himself that despite his desire to become true friends, she did not seem to feel the same way. Realized with a heavy heart that in her eyes, he was likely nothing more than her friend's little brother. Observing the scene around the table, he caught a subtle shift in the atmosphere as Seth cast a quiet, knowing gaze across the room. Noble Lord turned his head slightly, locking eyes with the young boy across the table. Meanwhile, Dissy eagerly questioned Cyril about the grand clock tower in the royal capital, listening intently as he described its impressive scale and history. Watching their energetic conversation, the boy noted to himself that Yui's warm smiles toward his sister proved she bore no hatred, making her distant demeanor toward him all the more puzzling. Pondered whether she was aware of his feelings, while an old warning echoed in his mind about the severe consequences of interfering with a dragonkin's mate. Turning the conversation back to their surroundings, Dissy mentioned the stack of literature Seth had acquired, to which the tall lord smoothly confirmed his substantial purchases. Seth offered a knowing smile, his subtle glance completely registering with the observant young boy. The unspoken exchange left a quiet silence in the room, as even the simple onlookers sensed the profound depth behind that single lingering gaze. Watches as the noble lord's focus remains entirely fixed on the young girl sitting beside him at the table, attentive only to her presence. Someone inquires about what books were purchased. The noble quietly replies that he bought history books, continuing to dine alongside her. Remembering her radiant smile when expressing gratitude, the young boy looks away in quiet sorrow, fully aware that she has never looked at him with such warmth. Knowing he stands no chance and has no place beside her, he realizes that no matter how deep his feelings are, he is not her chosen mate. Yet, clenching his fist tight, he finds the resolve to call out to her. Driven to take action, he asks if she will come see him off when he departs for the royal capital, to which she warmly agrees, all while the surrounding adults observe the tender exchange in silence. Bound in a silent, desperate embrace, the resolve burned brighter than ever, a vow never to let go of these cherished feelings, nor the person held so close. Few days after the dinner gathering, the morning came for Cyril to return to the royal capital. As he loaded his belongings onto the carriage, he looked up in surprise to see his friends coming out to bid him farewell. With a gentle smile, his sister offered her quiet parting words, wishing him safety on his journey ahead, to which he softly echoed the same tender sentiment. He wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug, promising to write as many letters as she could until they met again as adults, even as they jokingly worried over the cost of postage. Watching them, the young boy quietly pondered the heavy choices made for the sake of one's dreams, wondering if he himself could ever bring his heart to leave his master's side. Meanwhile, Valentine reassured the young traveler that his sister was now precious family to them all, offering an open welcome whenever he wished to reach out. Siblings shared one last light-hearted moment, teasing each other about lending pocket money should trouble ever arise during his travels. Stood watching them with a warm, gentle gaze as the final moments before departure ticked away. Turning to Yui, Cyril voiced his sincere gratitude, remembering how Yui had taught him math and protected him from the gray wolf, declaring that a true merchant always repays a debt. Sister playfully lightly cuffed him on the head, teasingly demanding a merchant discount once he made it big in the capital. Offering a brilliant, cheerful smile, she reminded him that she fully expected to hold him to that promise in the future. Without warning, a sudden force violently yanked the girl backward, breaking the peaceful scene in an instant. Startled by the abrupt movement, the young boy turned in utter confusion, just as words of deep affection slipped from his lips. A terrifying flash of movement, an imposing figure grabbed Cyril firmly, pulling the girl securely behind their protective shelter. Glaring down with lethal glowing intensity, the protector sternly warned him never to touch her again, asserting the grave danger of laying hands upon a dragoon's mate. Firm grasp held Yui securely against his chest as Cyril boldly declared his deep feelings, exclaiming aloud his love for her without hesitation. Unfazed by the noble's imposing presence, the young boy passionately warned him to cherish her properly, vowing that if she were ever in crisis, he would come to take her back to the capital, and never let her be taken for granted. Reassuring the earnest boy with calm dignity, Celeste promised he would never make her cry or treat her carelessly as she found immense comfort wrapped tightly within his protective arms. Looking at Cyril, she realized that while she did not dislike him, the sensation of being held in Celeste's embrace brought an overwhelming sense of solace that she could not deny. Apologizing softly to Cyril, she admitted that although romantic love was still difficult to fully comprehend, her heart knew without a doubt that she wished to remain beside Celeste from now on. Tears welled in her eyes as she realized he was the one person she wished to hold, hug, and journey home with, while Cyril met her confession with a bittersweet, understanding smile. Satisfied with her true desire, the boy charged Celeste with the duty of making her happy, bowing respectfully before preparing to take his leave. Turning back toward the waiting carriages, Cyril gave a parting wave as he ran off into the distance, bringing a final end to their shared moment. Watching his departure, she offered her silent gratitude, realizing that his presence had allowed her to finally understand her genuine feelings. Still feeling lightheaded and dazed from the emotional revelation, she looked up into Celeste's gentle gaze as he cradled her warmly. Taking both of her hands into his own, he stood before her with an earnest expression, ready to speak his heart. He asked if she would remain by his side, humbly questioning whether someone like him could truly be enough for her. Reminding her of the unwavering devotion inherent to Dragonkin, he gazed into her eyes, receiving her warm affirmation that everything he did brought her immense joy. Overcome with affection, she gathered the courage to ask if she could truly become his mate, to which he eagerly and wholeheartedly agreed. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she expressed her profound thanks, overwhelmed by the depth of his devotion and care. Wrapped in a tight embrace, he expressed his deepest gratitude to his savior, overflowing with joy to officially share such a sacred bond with him. The carriage began to move. 17 and Yui offered a warm farewell from the estate, prompting Cyril to wave back one last time from the open wagon. The heavy rumble, the giant gate slowly closed shut behind them, leading Cyril to softly utter their names in quiet contemplation as the estate faded into the distance. Exhausted, Cyril slumped down beside an elderly merchant inside the wagon, wrapping his arms around his knees as he silently confessed just how terrified he had been through the ordeal. Noticing the boy's distress, the experienced trader offered gentle words of comfort, reassuring Cyril that he had already done more than enough and explaining that hard work in business does not always guarantee success. Merchant went on to explain that while effort might not always be rewarded, it is never wasted, praising Cyril for standing up to a dragonkin, confessing his love, and gaining wonderful, irreplaceable life experiences. Tears streaming down his face, Cyril firmly declared his resolve to become an incredible merchant who could procure anything Yui could ever want, moving forward into the future as the caravan journeyed across the open land.